What is going on, YouTube? It is your boy Faithful to God, and tonight we are going to be presenting everybody with a primer. This is Lashawan Qadash Refuted, a primer, an introduction, whatever you want to call it, to the topic of Lashawan Qadash. Now, for those who don't know, Lashawan Qadash is the purported ancient Paleo Hebrew dialect that is pushed by groups like the ICGJC or ISUPK, GMS, and the various One Wester groups. We're going to get into that in a little bit, but before we do that, I actually want to let everybody give the introduction. So, let's go ahead and begin with the brother Jay. Brother Jay, say what's up to everybody out there.
Yo, what's going on, brothers and sisters? Hope everybody's day is going well. Lord allow us to convene once again here on Google Hangout. This is video 3, man. It just keeps getting worse for these guys, and today won't be no different. Concerning this language here, dealing with this Lashawan Qadash, and this brother's Judah Naz, and even these other One West camps that hold to that fake Hebrew. Right. So let the brothers get into it, man. But y'all brothers and sisters, peace, man.
Yeah, definitely. And by the way, for those people who are wondering, Brother Jay, the album is in the works, and could you let everybody know about the album if you could?
Yeah, man. For those that may not know, I'm working on a new project called AD, like 70 AD. Stands for After Deception. First album project since fully coming out of the Black Hebrew Israelite movement. So this definitely be an album you want to catch on or get when it drops. Right now, I'm just about done with it. I only got a few songs left, and then I'll be moving on, get everything right on the marketing side, and I'll be making the announcement maybe in the next 2 weeks concerning when it's actually going to be released as far as the album, and then Lord's will, the singles will start dropping next month. February. So, y'all brothers and sisters, stay tuned for that. Follow me on the Instagram, Jay the Producer, or J_the Producer with 2 R's at the end. As well as my website, jtheproducer.com. That's the letter J, THE, producer.com. That's where you guys will get, a lot of the updates. As well as there's a section to sign up for email list on the website. You guys sign up for that as well, because I'll be sending out news blasts with updates regarding the project. And on Lord's will, I haven't set the night yet, but on the next late night chill, I'll be making another announcement concerning what I spoke about a couple of weeks ago on one of the late night chills concerning the music video. So you brothers and sisters, stay tuned for that news as well.
Yeah, that's what's up, man. Well, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand things off to Abu. Abu, if you could introduce yourself, let everybody know what group you're affiliated with, and everything like that. If people already don't know, because they've already seen you on here enough, they probably already know. But go right ahead and introduce yourself, man.
Thank you very much. My name is Abu Hamad. I'm currently an affiliate of the Shield Squad. Previously, I was with Truth After Knowledge. I'm just someone who has some interest in some of the claims of the various One West groups and those who have been influenced by them. And one of my interests is Semitic languages and the claims they make about Lashawan Qadash. In this particular video, we'll be focusing on a couple of different people, and I think it's going to be an interesting subject.
Absolutely.
Just a bit.
Real quick, Abu, could you kind of give everybody kind of a brief outline of the history of this particular topic? Where did this dialect come from? Because obviously the proponents of the dialect assert that it came from, the ancient Israelites, that they claim that it's ancient Hebrew. But the truth of the matter is that it's actually a very modern dialect. So could you go ahead and kind of give a brief history of this topic for anybody out there who might be unfamiliar with the topic?
Yeah, no problem. So the gist of it is this. It's a form of Hebrew where the only real difference between quote unquote Lashawan Qadash and like a standard form of Hebrew, whether biblical Hebrew or even modern Israeli Hebrew, the real salient difference is in terms of their approach to pronunciation. They believe that each character in the Hebrew script or each Hebrew phoneme can only be vocalized in one way. There's only one possible vocalization for each character or phoneme, and so it's like ba, God. It started with One West, but since then it's been transmitted over the internet. And as we're going to touch on in this video, there are people who are not associated with One West groups who are nonetheless influenced by them and also using essentially the same system. The best example of that is Torah Knights, who they use a slightly tweaked version of One West's Lashawan Qadash. It started with it was long understood to have been started by Ariyah, the high priest and one of the founders of the Israeli Church of Universal Practical Knowledge, which was at 1 West 125th Street. However, some old timers said that it was actually created by Abba Bivens, so-called Abba Bivens, who was the teacher of Ariyah and Ariyah's father Yaiquab. Now, Vocab's page has a whole video on that, on the history of whether or not starts with Ariyah, or whether or not it goes back to Abba Bivens. But either way, it starts with essentially One West. You know, assuming we can include Abba Bivens within One West, that's a slightly more controversial subject because he died before, you know, the actual building was set up, but whatever the case.
But now here's the thing. As far as, you know, regardless of who necessarily, you know, introduced the dialect into the school, the point is that it was still an invention that was foisted onto the members of One West. In other words, it's clearly a One West creation, right? This wasn't something that
20th century creation at that, created in New York in the 20th century.
Right. Well, as we're going to see tonight, we have two distinct groups, and neither group is affiliated with the other. So the first group will be the ISUPK, and then the next group will be Torah Knights. And as you were pointing out, Torah Knights has a slightly revised version of the dialect, although they still retain some of the problematic aspects of it, right? Even though they're claiming to tweaking it and, oh, you know, we're fixing it, but the reality is it still contains the same exact problems. So, you know, but before we get into that, I was kind of thinking about perhaps showing some, you know, Hebrew Israelites who, for example, you know, well, I should say not Hebrew Israelites, former members of different camps, and, you know, people who were, you know, originally a part of, let's say, the Israelite Church of God in Jesus Christ, for example, or even Tahar himself from GMS, who either seemingly have some sort of, you know, not 100% faith in the dialect, in the case of Tahar, or at least giving off that sort of an impression that the dialect could be wrong, or in the case of former members realizing that the dialect was completely fraudulent, it has no basis, and they really were just told to believe it based off of take my word for it type thing. You know, so
real quick, I mean, that's the funny thing. They act like it's so obvious that anyone who studies, you know, the evidence is there. But then really, when you really press them on it, you get a few of them who admit it's faith. It's a matter of faith. But we'll see. We'll get into it.
Right. So real quick, what I'm going to do is, if you guys just give me a moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the brother Jay, if he would be so kind, to actually play a couple of clips. Matter of fact, brother Jay, if you could, in the folder that I sent you, could you go ahead and play the clip? I think the first clip that we're going to look at is ex-ICGJC members discussing LQ, or Lashawan Qadash. So if you could pull that up. And then that would be the first clip that we look at. So the two gentlemen are former members of the Israelite Church of God in Jesus Christ, which is still home to Ariyah and to Shar, who were two of the 7 original heads, if I'm not mistaken. Would that be correct, Abu?
Yeah, precisely. They have 2 of the 7 heads, and then some of their other heads are, you know, people who are pretty high ranking as well. Like, you know, they still got Kakam and all that. But anyway, yeah, 2 former members of the ICGJC, which is the true heir to the ICUPK.
Right. So what we're going to show is 2 former members of the Orlando camp, if I'm not mistaken, and they're going to go ahead and share their thoughts. Actually, before I do that, let me go ahead and present to Brother Jay. And matter of fact, Brother Jay, I'm going to give you my controls right now. Forgot to do that. All right, there you go. All right, so without further ado, brother, go ahead and play the clip.
So I remember one night in Orlando at the Lancaster Church. Not Lancaster. It was on Lancaster on Colonial. I think Lashawan was teaching that night. He was like the high priest of the state of Florida. He was going back and forth between Miami and Orlando teaching. But that night he was with us. I don't know if it was like a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday class. I don't remember exactly, but I do remember asking him. I was like, "Salaki, sir." I was like, "How do we know that the language that we speak or that we're learning is true?" Because I still to this day I haven't met any person in that church that could speak Lashawan Qadash fluently. So I asked him, I said, how do we...
Never heard common conversation between, not even the apostles.
Never. Dude. And I asked him, I said, are there any artifacts or any proof that we can show the people in the street that we teach in the fruits, that we can show them to prove that we're teaching the original language? But check his response though. He says, brother, well, brother, we are the chosen people of God. We know our language. He said, we the chosen people of God, man. That's all you got to tell him. And the class kind of broke out in a chuckle. He kind of chuckled too. I did too. I was like, come on, sir, come on. You know, I was hyped up. I was into that shit. It is funny that you said that. I was into that shit. Damn well that I did not get my question. So
that was his answer?
Yeah, bro. But check it. I had a conversation with him after he left. And we actually laughed about this. He was like,
I was supposed to.
He was like, brother, he was like, to be real with you, I ain't have an answer for you.
Yeah, I was full of
He said, I didn't know that I could think to tell you at the time.
Right.
And I said, I kind of figured that, you know, but it just shows you like the little brainwashing goes, how deep the control goes, that you'll overlook shit. Makes sense. You know?
Me being there, period.
It's kind of like, you know, your life story when you're involved in that place. Makes sense that you just
it didn't make sense, bro.
Yeah. So basically what they were talking about there is that when they were in the school, there was a high-ranking member who was basically teaching a class, and when the gentleman asked him about the dialect, clearly the man not having a response, basically, as the brother Jay would say with some of these camps, pulling a strong and wrong, right?
Right.
On his own member of his camp, basically told him, "Oh, we know our language," and that was pretty much the answer that he gave him. And after the both he and the teacher eventually left the ICGJC, and when they met up, as you guys heard, the former teacher and head, high-ranking member or whatever it was, told him straight up, "Yeah, I really didn't have an answer for you." And that's really what this is about. Most of these members in these camps, or in the case of people like, Torah Knights, where it's not necessarily a camp, it's more of a online collective that comes together and kind of does like a pseudo fellowship type thing where they, come together and try to exchange ideas. A lot of these people are almost forced to take this on, the whim of what the group is telling them. Like in the case of Torah Knights, yeah, if Judah Nazara tells you it's true, then yeah, you got to go with what he says. Or, if, for example, the ISUPK, and more so the ISUPK, don't let me strawman Judah Nazara, because he may come out and say, "Oh, well, nobody's obligated to listen to me, blah, blah, blah." But in the case of the ISUPK, I think it's a case of where, you have to believe the breakdowns. If not, you get out the school. right? And part of those would be, you know, the dialect. So, Abu, what are your thoughts on that clip that we just saw?
Well, no, I mean it's interesting, and I think it's indicative for anyone who's been through these various One West groups that, you know, most of them know that there's really no evidence out there, and it's just sort of taught as a brute fact. And like you said, in some of these places, certainly the old One West, there was it also it goes hand in hand with a little bit of coercion, and I think the ICGJC has sort of been like that as well. You know to keep your mouth shut, because if you question too much, you get a report put on you. I've seen that. Back in the day, there was a guy in the ICGJC that used to show us that they would write private reports on anybody who asked too many questions in their, you know, their gatherings and stuff. And then, but then on top of that, there's also like a psychological thing that's always existed within the One West and you know, back in the old ICUPK and then the ICGJC, where they have this thing you'll notice in their videos. They've been doing it for decades, where they say something, and even if it doesn't make any sense, like every third or fourth sentence, you'd be like, everybody understand, and everybody, yeah, you know, and it's sort of con, yeah. So it creates this sort of groupthink where even if you don't understand, everybody else around you is saying they do, so you just kind of go along with it, you know. So there's the coercion, and then there's the sense of like, just go along with it, you know.
Right.
But I think most of these guys know there's no evidence. There are a few people out there who think there is evidence. We're going to get into that when we get into Officer Khapash from ISUPK. But when these guys attempt to produce evidence in favor of Lashawan Qadash, it's so bad. It shows how shallow. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but it shows how shallow their understanding of the subject is.
Absolutely. And you know, something else that I think we should look at is Tahar. So here you have Tahar, who is still firmly entrenched in the Hebrew Israelite mindset, the one Wester Hebrew Israelite mindset, mind you. And yet even he isn't 100% confident as he would like to lead on, you know, or he will, you know, have his members believe. And so Brother Jay, if you could you play the clip of Tahar talking about Lashawan Qadash? So there's actually two of them, but it's the I believe it's the one where he's like in a room, because there's one where it's like an image of them outside. There's another one where he's in a room. So if you could play that one, like he's sitting down.
All right. And he called the Hebrew that we're speaking, which his actual Hebrew name was Nathaniah. He's calling that Ebonics Hebrew. Basically, he's calling it ghetto or. So he completely made a mockery of the Hebrew, what he believed to be as a true Hebrew. And he said there was 5 forms of Hebrew, and he said Yiddish was one of them. Yiddish is not Hebrew. Yiddish is some German, part German with a little so-called Hebrew mixed into it, like they make their own words up. Like the word schmuck. Schmuck is not a Hebrew word. Schmuck is a Yiddish word. That's Yiddish. That's not Hebrew. That doesn't sound like Hebrew. That's not Hebrew. You have these so-called Jews over there in Israel calling themselves speaking the Hebrew, but we don't believe that that's the real Hebrew. Now, the Hebrew that we teach, that we have names, we got our names from the ancient Hebrew. Like, for example, Gabar, that's Hebrew for warrior. Now, could we be wrong? Yeah, we could be wrong. Now, could we be wrong? Yeah, we could be wrong. Now, could we be wrong? Yeah, we could be wrong. Until you get a time machine and go back into time during the time of King David, or before that, or during the time of Yahushua, and you actually listen to him speak, then you can say, yeah, I jumped in the time machine, I went back in time 2,000 years, 3,000 years, and yes, they speak the Hebrew that we speak. So any scholars that say, oh, it's spoken this way, and oh, it's spoken that way, and it's pronounced this way, and it's pronounced that way, the way we speak it is based upon faith. The way we speak it is based upon faith. The way we speak it is based upon faith. When we say the Most High's name, Yahweh, and his son's name, Yahushua. Now you got other people that say it's slightly different. They'll, instead of saying Yahushua, they'll say Yoshua.
Now, isn't it interesting that he's saying this now, right? But yet he's the same guy that claims that, you know, he's the only one. His group is the only one that has the truth. Come to GMS. We're the only ones teaching the truth. You go to them other camps, you won't be confused. But meanwhile, the very dialect that he's using, even though he's still you're still catching a little bit of his pride, he still calls it ancient Hebrew. But as you guys heard, he says, could we be wrong? Yeah, we could be wrong. So the question is, for a man like himself who is a sacred namer, who believes that you have to say Christ's name in Hebrew in that specific dialect, what if he's wrong according to his own logic? So he's been telling people all this time, you're going to be missile food if you don't call Christ Yahushua. But he's not 100% sure of the very dialect that he promotes. And then he says that they take it on faith. But, you know, I mean, what do you guys think of this?
If I may, what this reminds me of is, I'm sorry, is Jay gonna speak? Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. But you want to?
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. What I was gonna say is, what this reminds me of is the whole fiasco with the Mashah's King David, that fiasco in Rebel Alliance Media. There's a few videos on that out there where, you know, Tahar was coming out hard and confident that, you know, about Mashah being King David. And then when Rebel Alliance Media started pressing him, all of a sudden these guys started saying, well, you know, it's a thing of faith. It's a thing of faith. You know, these are the guys that tell everybody, prove all things, prove all things. And then all of a sudden when they get pressed, it's a thing of faith. And so now, you know, he's been pressed so much on Lashawan Qadash that now he's singing the same tune on that. Well, you know, it's a thing of faith. And I believe we got another audio clip where he says that again. But there's an interesting point here also. He says, you know, we can't get into a time machine, go back to the time of David or the time of, you know, of Christ. But the interesting thing is we do, maybe not from the time of David, but we do have transliterations from the time of Christ. So we don't need to jump into a time machine. And we'll get into that today. We've gotten into it several times in the past, and we'll do it again. And Tahar should know about this. He does know about this. So it's kind of shameful, you know, his line of thought, but whatever. Looks like everybody's muted, huh?
Well, I do apologize. I was trying to unmute. Yeah, I was going to say the interesting thing is that, for example, you have a gentleman in the live chat who was asking if it was all right to use an invented, stylized dialect in order to convey thoughts. And I told him, no, there isn't a problem with using a dialect. If you want to invent a dialect, hey, that's cool. It's creative. The problem is when you're pushing the idea that the dialect is ancient Hebrew when it isn't. That's the problem. The problem is when you have these groups who are asserting that the dialect that they speak is the true Hebrew, the so-called pure Hebrew, and that any other form of Hebrew, or what they perceive to be other forms of Hebrew, are somehow false. Right? That, oh yeah, you know, that, you know, they'll go out on a limb and say, oh, that's the fake Hebrew, that's the so-called Jews Hebrew. But meanwhile, as you kind of alluded to, we're going to see Christ and others using the very pronunciations that they claim are so-called, or as you know, some of them would even call Yiddish, even though clearly the pronunciations aren't Yiddish. And that'll be another topic that we'll touch on a little later. But you know, Abu, in all your dealings with proponents of this dialect, have you ever found anybody who has ever been able to present even something, just anything, any sort of tangible evidence? Or is it just pure conjecture, pure, you know, basically, yeah, can you kind of go into some of your dealings with people that tend to promote the dialect?
This is what I would say. The vast, and I've conversed and talked in person even with a bunch of people, but conversed online, corresponded online with many people on this subject. The vast majority of them have no argument whatsoever. It's just faith. A huge percentage of them, much like we're going to see with Chapash later on, they confuse script with language. They think if they just point to the Phoenician script, then that sums up their belief about the pronunciation system that they promote. They look right there. Look at the, you know, the so-called Moabite stone. That's right there. You know, so that there's that crowd. Mm-hmm. And then you have to explain to them the difference between script and language, which we'll get into today. Second, aside from that, there's one guy who came out with a video, and a couple other people would promote it, and he would do this thing where he found a couple of people online that he thought supported his case, and he would just take their claims and say, there you go, almost as if to say, like Esau himself said it. He found a website where somebody said something similar, but the websites present no evidence. And in some cases, this dude was ignoring the sources. One interesting thing, though, I'll say this. One interesting thing that they came up with, the ICGJC comes up with this. Very rarely do they bring this out. But in one of James Adair's books, now James Adair, take everything he says with a grain of salt, because he doesn't really present any evidence.
I know where he's going. Yeah.
Yeah, there's not a lot of nuance in James Adair's approach, and but nonetheless, James Adair will make these vague references to the the language of the Indians and stuff like that, and it's so hard to check anything he says. But nonetheless, at one point he claims that he found a tribe that during a ceremony would chant Yahweh Shu, Yahweh Shi, Yahweh Sho, Yahweh Shai, right? And so the ICGJC, some members of the ICGJC, including one particularly brilliant former member of the ICGJC, he was one of the people who showed this to me. They appeal to that and say, well, look, this James Adair is writing well before Arya, so Arya couldn't have made it up. It's a bit of a leap, but that's probably their most interesting argument. It's a poor argument though, because it's not necessarily, it's actually also employing phonemes that they claim don't exist. That's number one. And two, it's totally unclear if James Adair actually heard that, and B, even if he did, what it's referring to. I had a very interesting conversation on Twitter about this, where I likened it to the people who try to find Muhammad in Songs 516. So it kind of sounds like what this name that we apply to a person, therefore it must be referring to him.
Right. Right. And by the way, let's go ahead and play two more clips. We'll play one of Tahar, and then we'll play one from the ICGJC, former ICGJC members. All right. So if you could, my brother Jay, it would be the second clip with Tahar, and you could please play that one.
All you guys that left GMS or got kicked out or whatever the case may be, you only come against us. There's a lot of Israelite groups out there that's teaching all kind of bull doctrine, like GOCC. You guys haven't made a video on GOCC concerning the name, because you guys still call on the name of Yahweh B'Shem Yahweh Shai, which you got from us. The spirit didn't come down. Hey, a man in a gray suit didn't come in your kitchen and tell you the Most High's name is Yahweh and his son's name is Yahweh Shai. You got that from us, and you believed it through faith that was his name. You guys still keep your same ancient Hebrew names, the Lashawan Qadash. You still say Hebrew words in the Lashawan, or the so-called Lashawan Qadash. All right, whether it's made up or not, according to a vocab alone.
I love it. Oh man, that shows that he was feeling the pressure from vocab's videos on the subject. That's what that shows. So shout out to vocab for getting in the head of Tahar on the subject of Lashawan Qadash, and bringing him to the point where not only does he call it faith, but he calls it the so-called Lashawan Qadash, because all of us, you included, Faithful, we brought out that that the very phrase comes from rabbinic literature, not the Bible. And then on top of that, he's sort of quasi open to, well, maybe it's made up, whether it's made up or not.
Right. And actually, let me do something real quick so we could kind of just speed ahead a little bit with this, because I know we have some other things to bring out. I want to show a former member of the ICGJC, and I'm really bad with names, so if you are this individual, please forgive me if I don't remember your name. But I'm gonna play this clip. Just want to ensure if you guys see my screen? All right, there we go. All right, can you guys see my screen? Everybody can see my screen?
Yep.
Okay,
all right.
I can see it. Yep.
All right, I'm gonna run this in my sound mix, and I'm gonna play the clip now. Here we go.
all that. The man barely speaks English correctly, so how he, you know, I mean, come on. The Hebrew tongue, all right? The Hebrew language. A sister from Philadelphia named Shekumyapa. She got kicked out of the Daughters of Zion, whatever you call that, the Daughters of Zion, because she greeted Tazadaki on the phone and she said, "Ma shalom ka, sir." The man snapped on her. And he said, you know, you trying to speak Hebrew to me, sister? And the man ain't know what it meant, okay? And, you know, he was put on the spot. He didn't know what to say and how to respond. And he put out the Daughters of Zion thing, okay? That's a true story. So how you gonna get the gift of speaking in tongues and the man that's supposed to be the man with the Holy Spirit, the only man with the Holy Spirit on earth, he himself do not have that ability. The man claimed he went.
Wow, that's interesting. I never saw that clip before.
Yeah, but the interesting point is that here you have Tazadakia, right? Somebody who was, you know, for all intents and purposes, chosen, right, by you know, Arya, or at least endorsed by Arya. Let me say it that way. He was endorsed by Arya. Arya is purported by some to have been the inventor of the dialect. You know, the fact is that, you know, Tazadakia's very name is a Lashawan Qadash name, and yet, you know, he claims to be the Holy Spirit incarnate, right? And yet here this woman spoke to him in that dialect, which again, as we're going to find out later, is shaky. And he didn't understand it, right? He didn't understand it, even though they give off, or they want to give off this impression that they understand it. Oh, this is the ancient language. You should know this. In fact, didn't they have something called the Hebrew Academy over there, where basically they're teaching people the dialect, and really it's just an arbitrary kind of piecing together where it's really based on Strong's Concordance and, you know, things like that, right, Abu? It's like very arbitrary, very novice, very, you know, nothing that anybody would consider to be, you know, and nothing that's going to put any sort of professional to shame. You know, it's like very arbitrary.
Oh, absolutely. It's well shallow and surface level. I've seen. So here's the thing. Here's what I've got to see. I've seen a little bit of the class notes from the One West back in the early '90s. I've seen some of the stuff that Robert Yawanathan Dennis put out. If you guys look him up, he's interesting. He's at Israelite.net. He was a former member of the ISUPK, and he put out some stuff based on the notes that he received. You know, the teachings that he received in at One West. Then also in around 2005, there was a guy in the ICGJC that used to show me what they were teaching then. And then you can also see the Lashawan Qadash videos put out by the new ISUPK today. And honestly, I can tell you it's the same thing across the board. It's just random vocabulary, almost no discussion on grammar. There's very shallow discussion on grammar. They'll say, well, you know, this is future tense, this is past tense, this is that. There's no discussion on verb stems or anything like that. So it's mainly it's just counting vocabulary, stuff that appears in the Bible, and maybe how to pronounce a sentence from the Hebrew text of the Bible. Like here, we're gonna look at Deuteronomy 6:4, and it says Shema, Yasha Allah, blah, blah, you know, and down the line like that. But it's the teaching based on what I've seen present day around 2005 from the ICGJC, the notes from the 90s, and the stuff that Robert Yawanathan Dennis put out in the late 90s. It's the same across the board, and yeah, it's very shallow. It's just some vocabulary, very minuscule amount of grammar, and that's it. And some humorous stuff is in there. The story that I love telling is the ICGJC was teaching that when they teach the numbers, you got all the Hebrew numbers, but then when you get to million, they were saying that it's Malayawan is the Hebrew, the Lashawan Qadash. You know, which is clearly they're taking a loan word from another language and putting their pronunciation.
From modern Israeli Hebrew, ironically enough, but then they'll be the same ones to tell you that, you know, modern Israeli Hebrew, you can't trust that. And here they are taking a modern Israeli word and then, you know, incorporating the so-called pronunciation system that they've invented into that word. Yeah, it's ridiculous. But you know, so there. You kind of have some examples of Tahar. You have examples of former members of the ICGJC. And what we're basically seeing is that this dialect from the onset is faulty, even from those who are promoting it, like Tahar. You know, there is no real confidence there. Let's be honest. If there was genuine confidence.
May I say one thing? That last clip you showed, just so people know, that was Rakah Harab, because I remember you saying you weren't sure about the guy's name. Rakah Harab,
yes,
former member from out there in I believe he's out there in Camden, because it's funny, I'm not too far. I'm in Pennsylvania.
Right. And they have that channel, the detoxification unit, I think it is, or detoxification.
Detoxification, something. Yeah, it's great stuff. It's on Facebook. Yeah. Good stuff.
Right. They expose a lot of the funny business that went on in that school. The thing is that what I'm really thinking about is, you know, here you have like someone like Tahar, and yet this guy would. I'm almost sure that if somebody who is well versed in the Hebrew language, a professional, somebody who's a linguist who knows the ins and out of the language and knows different, you know, how different Shemitic, as I use that term Shemitic because, you know, they don't like the term Semitic, but you know how different Shemitic languages actually work. If somebody were to call out Tahar, do you think Tahar would be confident enough to actually do a debate on this topic? Of course not.
Absolutely not. It's completely shallow. You can see that.
Right. He would absolutely positively shy away from doing any sort of debate on this topic. And the fact of the matter is that I've actually engaged several Lashawan Qadash proponents on this topic, and none of them seem confident of it. They all seem to kind of shy away. They kind of make excuses. Oh, well, you know, we're not saying this is perfect, or we're not saying it's this. You know, there's just an overall lack of confidence. But then these will be the same individuals that would later make videos basically telling other Hebrew Israelites, more specifically in the other camps, that if you don't use this pronunciation in this dialect that they're not even confident of, then you're going to be quote unquote missile food. So it's the disingenuousness. It's the, you know, it's just very, you know, just sad. It's really the only way that I could explain it. But, you know, let's go ahead and kind of really jump into this thing, because I know this is a primer, so we're kind of just showing some of the you know, different individuals, whether former members or not, of camps, you know, talking about the dialect and showing that it's shaky, you know. But Abu, I'm gonna go ahead and you know, let you guide us into this, so to speak. So what are we gonna go into right now?
Well, next, like we said, we have we're going to focus on another response to the Torah Knights, but that's going to be later in the video. You know, we put out 2 previous videos on the Torah Knights, basically on the de facto head of the Torah Knights, which is Judah Natsara. Now one of his students or followers or whatever stepped up to, so we're going to respond to that. But first, we're going to get into Officer Khapash from the ISUPK, the new ISUPK. Recently, So Real had a debate with Officer Khapash, and it's, you know, all credit to So Real. It was a great performance, and he's doing a lot of great stuff out there. So I have a tremendous respect for So Real. I really like his stuff.
Could I just stop you just for a moment? Just I don't mean to interject, but I wanted to point something out, because I know that Khapash is going to watch this in the future, but I have to say this. You know, I know it seems a little, you know, arbitrary and maybe like, you know, low hanging fruit to go after, but I'm just gonna say it. The ISUPK is not the original school. I know Johanna wants to put on that the ISUPK is somehow the original school, or at the very least original in the sense that they're holding on to the original doctrines, but that's not even the case. And that'll be another video for another day, so I won't go into that. But I just wanted to point that out. That's why you rightfully said new ISUPK, because the original ISUPK, if we're being honest here, and if people want to be technical, the original ISUPK is in fact the Israelite Church of God in Jesus Christ, being that they were originally known as the Israeli School of Universal Practical Knowledge, hence the acronym ISUPK. And it is important to note that 2 of the original 7 heads are still in that school, which would be Arya and Shah. And let it be on record, Arya endorsed Tazadakia as the leader. He did not endorse Johanna. You know, I just wanted to point that out, because I mean, it seems like something arbitrary, but to be honest, because, you know, the ISUPK puts out the claim of being the home of the truth, and Yohana's the only man in Israel who's been chosen to lead. But meanwhile, the guy wasn't even picked by Ariyah, who was in the original 7. You know, he chose the cameraman. I just, you know, and you know, I can go into other things, but you know, I just wanted to point that out. But yeah, you know, the new ISUPK. So Qadash had a debate with Cyril, and Brother Jay, could you do us a favor and show the clip of Qadash? He's gonna go into the dialect. Let's see what he has to say.
Sorry, you gotta do the thing. Yep.
All right. So he made a claim that the Lashawan Qadash was invented by a brother in 1969 in our school. That he basically made this out of like fucking, you know, he just made up some letters and called it ancient Hebrew. All right. This is the Lashawan Qadash right here. We got the Abba Gada Hawa Zakata Yakala Manasa I Patazakwa Rasha and Tha. Okay. Pretty well. Now we're going to pull the same and out of the Bible dictionary. All right. This is the Zondervan Bible Dictionary. Okay. And the ISUPK, even though people think, you know, give us a lot of credit, we did not write this book. You understand that? Now, you will see right here where it says alphabet going into the Hebrew, the modern Hebrew. Right here. That's the ah. I got my finger on the ah. I have my finger on the ah so you can hear. Make sure y'all can see. Say ah. Okay, that's the ah. This is the ah in the Lashawan Qadash that we teach in school since 1969. They are both the same character. They are both the same character from the Bible.
All right. So real quick, and you know, I do apologize for the audio, but this is actually the way that it was when it was going on. Here you have Qadash making an appeal to the Paleo script, which is a common tactic used by LQ proponents. Abu, could you explain to the audience why this is, number one, a completely and incredibly ignorant thing for him to do, and also, you know, kind of go into you know, just the holes in the presentation. I mean, like this wasn't this is ridiculous. But yeah, go right ahead, Abu.
Well, first and foremost, it's a straw man. I mean, nobody said that he made up that One West made up the script. No one's claiming that, you know. But what it is that aside from that, he's confusing script with language. You know, you can write multiple languages in a single script, so it doesn't. And pointing to the script doesn't really tell us anything about how it was vocalized. You know, it doesn't. They sort of just assume, well, look, there's this ancient script, therefore the claims we make about pronunciation just, you know, win by default. But you know, to get into the difference between script and language, I was wondering, Jay, if you could pull up that first image in the skeleton, the script languages. If not, I could pull it up. But
okay, and while you're doing that, I again want to reiterate the point that our objections are not with the script. It's with the purported dialect that they attach to the script, because they see, this is one thing that I want the audience to kind of catch before we go into that. The problem is that they're asserting that if you have a script, it can only have a specific dialect attached to it, right? That's really the gist of their argument. So the Paleo script in this case, in their pronunciation system, is supposedly only, you know, it only has one vowel sound for each character. And, you know, so all the other characters have the A vowel sound with the exception of the ayin, which they claim is just I, right? That makes the I as in pi sound. And yet, you know, if we think about it, what do they do with the example of, for example, the Babylonians who used a square script, or for example, the Phoenicians who used the same script that the, you know, ancient Paleo Hebrew script is based on? Are they asserting that these different groups spoke the same so-called dialect that they claim is ancient Hebrew? You know, so I think that just using those two quick examples, it immediately undermines their argument, right? Because if they're angling for, well, if you have a script, then it's this pronunciation and only this pronunciation, then again, how do they explain the fact that the Phoenicians used the same script and their dialect wasn't the Hebrew dialect, right? Or for example, the Babylonians used the square script. Their dialect, again, wasn't the Hebrew dialect. And we're going to actually talk about Assyrian and, you know, their language in contrast with Hebrew a little later when we go into the Torah Knights section of this hangout. But, you know, Abu, without further ado, if you could, you know, kind of explain to people why the argument is faulty.
Well, precisely for that reason. Here, actually, we're going to put here's a little simple example, and I thank Jay for putting this on the screen. So we have here 3 different languages, and there's more than these languages, but these are 3 languages that are written in the Arabic script. You know, we got the top line has Arabic, the second line has Urdu, and unfortunately I don't know much Urdu, so I just threw in Tumhara naam kya hai, what's your name? That's the only thing I know how to say in Urdu. And then the bottom line is Farsi. So you have multiple languages being written in the Arabic script. So a script does, and as you've pointed out many times, Faithful, is there's the same thing for Swahili. Swahili is also can be written in the Arabic script, often is written in the Arabic script, you know, and we have another example from the Latin script. Right. If Jacob pull that up, we have an image for the Latin script.
Right. But before we move on, I want this to be
these are just minor examples
of the listeners. Right. I know this is a minor thing, but again, let's point this out. This is the Arabic script being used in 3 distinct, totally different languages, right? Arabic, Urdu, and Farsi.
Yeah, Urdu and Arabic aren't even in the same language family. The Urdu is as different from Arabic as Yiddish is from Hebrew, you know?
Right. And yet here we have an example where all these 3 different languages, distinct or different languages, are incorporating the Arabic script. Now, imagine if a person is ignorant of these languages and they just see the script, they're going to assume that the language is Arabic, right? Just looking at the script. But if a person knows about the 3 languages, or if they're even familiar, for example, any of the speakers of these languages, if they were to look at it, they would immediately see the difference. For example, an Urdu speaker would see the immediate difference between the middle line versus the one on top, right? And a Farsi speaker would immediately notice the difference between the last line versus the 2 on top. You know, just I wanted to point that out. It feels like I have to qualify this for certain individuals because some of these things, I guess, get lost on them. But it's important that we highlight this because it's relative or relevant, I should say. Excuse me. It's relevant to the discussion that we're having, and it's going to highlight what we're about to see in a moment with the Latin script. So, Brother Jay, if you could pull that up, please. All right, and so Brother Jay, all right, there you go. All right, so Abu,
if I may, I mean, so we got, you know, just, and this is minor. It's gonna build as we go along. Here it is. There's many languages that are written in the Latin script. Here we show French, Spanish, Vietnamese, and English. We could show Somali. We could show Maltese. The language in Malta, they speak essentially Arabic. It's a dialect of Arabic, but they write it in the Latin script. And essentially, that something to that effect is happening in Somalia as well. You know, Turkey, about 100 years ago, switched to the Latin script. You know, they made well, that's actually Turkish is a good example. Turkish used to be written in the Arabic script. And at the time of Ataturk, you know, after the end of World War I, they made an abrupt switch to the Latin script. Now, the pronunciations of the language didn't change, and that's a significant thing to keep in mind. They merely changed their script. But more importantly, suppose we had a disagreement about how a word in Vietnamese or Spanish or French or English was pronounced. Merely pointing to the Latin script wouldn't mean that your claim about pronunciation wins by default. You know, you say, well, look, here's some people writing in the Roman script, therefore, you know, I didn't make up the script. Therefore, whatever claim I make about how that script is pronounced automatically wins by default. And that's it sounds absurd when you look at it with the Latin script, but that's essentially was Kapash's argument. You know, he confused script with language, you know, or script with pronunciation.
Right. But in the case of Kapash, for example, where you
Oh, looks like we lost Faithful. While we wait for him to come back in, one of the things we could do is we have the another thing we should probably get into the Phoenician script itself and show some interesting things with that. We can show an image that we had shown in our last show when we were dealing with Judah Natsara. There was an image. I was going to say, Jay, if you got that, then we have something where we show the 5 scripts, the 5 languages written in the Ashuri and Phoenician scripts. Or I could pull that up myself as well.
All right. So, all right, got that.
Excellent.
I mentioned just in case his computer. I know he had some technical difficulties before we got on. If it takes him a while to come in, the broadcast is going to end automatically, or it may stay on. He gave me moderators, but just in case it turn off, that's why, brothers and sisters, because you know, sometimes Google sometimes ends these things after like 5 minutes if the person who started doesn't come back. So so just look out for that if it does turn off. All right, so let me share my screen and you can go ahead right into it, Boo. All right, you see that?
Excellent. Yeah, perfect. So this is something that we showed last week, or was it not? Whatever last video that we did on this subject, and what we have here is the top 5 lines is in the standard Hebrew script, which is called the Ashuri script, the Assyrian script, the standard square script, and then the bottom 5 lines are in the Phoenician script. It's what they like to call the Paleo Hebrew script.
Here we go.
Oh, here we go. The brother's back. Praise God.
Yeah,
all right. So
now, how long was I out? You know,
it was only a couple of minutes. It's cool.
Yeah. So real quick, I don't know.
We just started to jump into this one, the one that's on the screen.
That's actually what it's funny because I don't know if I was talking to myself, but I was I was actually telling. Well, I thought I was saying it to the audience. You know, now we should actually go into the Paleo script and.
Yep.
You know, if I could, I don't know if I'm kind of interrupting your flow. If not, you know, matter of fact, let me actually let you finish. Yeah, let me let you finish your.
No, I'd actually be interested in hearing what you say. I was just getting started, so you can go ahead.
Yeah. So very quickly, what I wanted to kind of highlight is the fact that, again, a script is not going to tell you the way that a language is pronounced, a specific pronunciation for a language. It's just a script. It can be used for any language. So, for example, if a Latin speaker were able to learn the way that the script is used and incorporate his pronunciations into that script, he could very easily write in for example, this Hebrew script that we see right in front of us, right? Either of those scripts, matter of fact, either the square script or the Paleo script, and he could potentially use both of those scripts to write in his language, right? And I'm sure that's what you're about to go into right now. So, you know, and Abu, how arbitrary is the argument for a script to begin with? I mean, this is probably like the worst possible argument that someone who is, you know, trying to provide some sort of evidence for their dialect could possibly use, correct?
Mm-hmm. Well, but yet it's not like we said earlier. Most people don't even present an argument, but those who do will simply make this argument. Most of them will just make those who attempt to do so will make this argument where they'll just appeal to the script. And there are ancient examples of the Phoenician script. They'll say, well, look at the so-called Mesha Stele, which is the also called the Moabite stone. They'll say, well, look right there, and they'll claim Lashawan Qadash as if their dialect wins by default. So right. As you were saying, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I did want to point out something that usually it'll be the individuals who are in camps who are very ignorant of this subject, like GMS, for example, or those who either were formerly a part of GMS and splintered off and have their own group or whatever the case may be, or all these other groups, like, for example, ISUPK, the ICGJC, GOCC, any of the groups that are still using the fraudulent dialect. If we were to point this out to them, you know, their typical response would be something, you know, ad hominem, like, oh man, this is retarded. What are they talking about? You know, something to that effect. But isn't it ironic that the evidence that we're showing right now, we still haven't dwelled into the transliterations. Once we start going into transliterations, it's going to be very problematic for them when they begin to see the very vowel sounds that they claim do not exist in Hebrew. But yeah, I mean, this is like the typical response will usually be something akin to an ad hominem, right? Instead of actually addressing the argument, they'll, you know, just go into full ad hominem mode. And we've seen that with Judah Natzara, where he will barely deal with anything that we've said, if anything. I don't think he's actually dealt with anything that we presented. And instead, he'll just erect a straw man, or, you know, go into something completely unrelated, or in the case that, as we're going to see later, try to cast doubt on the name of the language, you know, something silly, right? To try to avoid that, you know, avoid dealing with the points that we're actually raising. But yeah, without further ado, Abu, could you actually present to everybody what we're seeing on the screen right now, you know, for anybody who's seeing this for the first time?
All right, so there's 5 lines up at the top in the Ashuri script, or the standard Hebrew script, and then there's 5 lines at the bottom in the Phoenician script. The 5 lines at the top are identical to the 5 lines at the bottom. It's the same text, just in different scripts. So because with the standard script and the Phoenician script, the standard Hebrew script and the Phoenician script, or the Ashuri script and the Phoenician script, there's a one-to-one correspondence between each character, with the exception of the so-called Sophit characters. That's to say that in Hebrew, or the final characters, there's a few letters that you write them differently when they're at the end of a word, and that's not the case with the Phoenician script. But other than that, there's a one-to-one correspondence between all the characters, so it's the same text. Now, the thing is, the first line of either section is Hebrew. The second line is Aramaic. It's Jewish Aramaic, specifically. It's from Targum Onkelos. The third line is Judeo-Arabic. Now, we're able to do this because all these languages have been written in the Hebrew script. There are forms of Aramaic called Jewish Aramaic that are written in the Hebrew script. There are forms of Arabic throughout the Middle Ages. Arabic was written by Jews in the Hebrew script. Saadia Gaon did that. Maimonides did that. And you have this whole concept of Judeo-Arabic. Then there were other languages like Yiddish, which is at the bottom row, and then also Ladino, which is just as Yiddish was essentially a dialect of High German or something like that, an old form of German rendered in the Hebrew script with a little bit of Hebrew and Slavic vocabulary. So too Ladino is a medieval form of Spanish, which was written in the Hebrew script with a little bit of Hebrew vocabulary. And that's what you see here. The first line is Hebrew, the second line is Aramaic, the third line is Arabic, fourth line is Spanish, Ladino, and then the fifth and final line is Yiddish, essentially German, an old dialect of German. And this is significant because it shows that there's that when you point to a script, you're not telling us anything about the language. Like if we showed these sentences to, you know, the proponents of Lashawan Qadash, I have a feeling that most of them, 99% of them, wouldn't be able to distinguish them, wouldn't be able to even tell us what language they were written in, you know?
Wait, let's point that out one more time. So here's the thing. If we don't tell them what we just finished saying, and we simply show them these lines, and we tell them to read them, you know, more times than not, if they just look at dialect, if they look at the script, they're going to come to the assumption that all of these are the same. And yet here we have an example, once again, to show why making an appeal to the script in and of itself is not evidence for the dialect. Because here you have, as you see, these different languages being written in all these distinct, these distinct different languages that are being written in these, in the same script, right? On the top, you have the square script, as they would call it, the Assyrian. And on the bottom, you have the Paleo script. Abu, if you could.
Yeah, I actually have something else I want to show in this regard to prove this point. Like in this case, we flat out told them what it says, but I'd like to go in reverse and give an example. Is it okay if I share an image relevant to this?
Yeah, absolutely. Go right ahead, man.
Let me pull this up and you give me screen sharing capabilities. Hold on. Share. All right, so let me know if you got that. You should be able to see that.
Give me a second. Yep, I see it. And that matter of fact, you actually have mod controls. So
okay. All right. So what you see on your screen is a sentence from a Semitic language written in the Phoenician script, or as they like to call it, the so-called Paleo Hebrew script. So we have here 4 words, 12 letters, and there's only 3 distinct characters being employed. Now, as we said earlier, the Phoenician script has a one-to-one correspondence with what's now considered the standard Hebrew script. So you should be able to see now the corresponding characters at the top of the screen. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay.
And by the way, for the audience who might not be catching it, could you kind of just very briefly explain? So at the top, we're seeing, for example,
so what I'm giving is of the 12 letters at the bottom in this sentence, these 4 words in a certain Semitic language, these characters, there's only 3 distinct characters being employed. Each of these characters they correspond to a character in the standard Hebrew script. So at the top of the screen, I put the key to understanding them. So, for example, the Lamed in the Phoenician script corresponds to the Lamed in the standard Ashuri Hebrew script, the Hebrew script that's standard now, also called the square script. And then you have the He in the middle, and then you have the Aleph on the right. So it's Lamed, He, Aleph. And so with that, now we can rewrite the sentence at the bottom in the standard Hebrew script. And you should be able to see that now. Now, there's another point to be made. Not only do these characters correspond to one another in these 2 scripts, each of these 3 distinct characters also correspond to characters in the Arabic script. And so now I've put up the corresponding Arabic characters. The Lamed on the left corresponds to the Arabic Lam, the He corresponds to the Arabic Ha, and the Aleph corresponds to the Arabic Alif. So now we can rewrite this sentence in the Arabic script. And I think at this point, at least people who are familiar with Arabic will say, oh, I know what that says. It says La ilaha illallah. It says Christians can affirm it too, Jews can affirm it too, but it's essentially it's most promoted by Muslims, which is the testament of faith that there's no God but the one God, or there's no God but Allah. And now the reason why I wanted to show this is because when we first started with this image, you just had some characters in the Phoenician script. But if you didn't know what it was, you might easily say, well, there's that Lashawan Qadash right there. Look a little closer, it's an Arabic statement. Now, admittedly, the first 3 words also appear in Aramaic and Hebrew, but the 4th word is very much a distinctly Arabic word. And I think that's a good illustration of that.
Absolutely. And again, so the appeal, so we can bring this back to the whole point of discussion with Kapash's argument for the script, is that by showing the script, you're not validating the so-called pronunciations that you claim or that you're parroting. Let me just say, I hate to be brash, but I have to say it the way that it is. They're essentially just parroting the claim that their camp leaders have told them. In the case of Kapash, it would be Yohana, or whoever, whatever general or captain is over his specific camp, whatever state he's in. It's basically the case of him just taking it based on their word for it, because they're, oh, look, here's the script. This script makes this sound, but I guarantee you, if you press any of them to prove those pronunciations in the form of an ancient transliteration, none of them can do so. It's as simple as that. Abu, could we do something too real quick? Might seem like a little slight deviation. Could you point out the example with Taza? Now, granted, Torah Knights have rejected this, but the ISUPK affirms this to this day. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe GMS does as well, and most of the other quote-unquote traditional Lashawan Qadash proponents. Can you explain why Taza, or what's actually known in actual Hebrew as Sadeh, why that word, Taza, explain that to people, why that's a faulty pronunciation, why it's one that, it's just sad.
Yeah, sure. Well, what's at issue is that the Hebrew character known as the Tzadeh in One West started calling it Taza. Now the question is, and as Faithful got into as Faithful got into Judah Natsara and the Torah Knights have at least rejected that. It's one of the few things they reject from the Lashawan Qadash system that came out of One West. But nonetheless, let's explain where that came from. When they were creating Lashawan Qadash, when One West was creating Lashawan Qadash, they obviously just threw an A sound into everywhere. So, for example, you get to the second Hebrew character, it's pronounced like a B, like the English B, so they made it ba. You get to the Gimel, you know, it's pronounced like a G, so it's ga. The Dalet is da, and they're just throwing the A sound in everywhere. Now, in some transliterations of the Tzadeh, it gets transliterated with a TZ. Some people do it with a TS, but some people do it with a TZ. And so when Arya or whoever reached that point and they saw TZ, they saw two consonants and they threw the A vowel in twice. They made it ta-za, which is preposterous.
By the way, TZ would be the Ashkenazi form, correct?
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, precisely. I mean, they clearly took it from like a rabbinic source.
Right.
You know,
Which,
and actually,
by the way, a lot of people don't realize that Arya came out of a rabbinic background, basically, you know, because when Abba Bibbins originally left the Commandment Keepers, clearly still had influence from the Commandment Keepers. It wasn't until a little before or after his death that you begin to see the changes that we begin to see today, right? For example, the introduction of this so-called pronunciation system, right? And this is where you begin to have the development in doctrine. But originally, Arya and these individuals, in fact, isn't it funny that his name was originally Arye, right? Arye, Abu?
yes, yeah, it was Ari, yeah,
Arye.
yeah, lion, the lion,
Ari.
Ari, and so that's how they get
And
Ari.
Masha was Moshe, and
Yep.
right. So,
in fact, when we look at their notes, yeah, it's Ari, yeah,
right. And then you know, Yaquab was originally Jacob. You know, but needless to say that with the development of doctrine, then we begin to see the introduction of this so-called pronunciation system. And you know, as I was pointing out to someone in the live chat, you know, someone was saying, well, is it okay? And I think I said this earlier. Is it, you know, they were asking if it was all right to use an invented dialect, you know, just, you know, on some creative stuff. And to be honest, there is no problem if someone is coming from that angle. The problem is when the individual is, again, making the assertion that the dialect is so-called ancient Hebrew, right? They're making the claim that the dialect is ancient Hebrew when it's clearly not. And that is our objection to the claim. Now, if somebody wanted to be creative and say, well, this is a dialect that we made up, we wouldn't have any problem with that. The problem is with the claim that goes along with the dialect. But again, as you were pointing out, Taza is a perfect example. Something that is absolutely sad. And by the way, isn't it ironic that you have all these guys with names like Tazadakia, Tazariak, and the reality is that their names aren't, you know, in actual Hebrew would never be pronounced that way. But yeah, let's go ahead and move along. I don't know if you wanted to you know, tackle maybe some more of what Kapash said, because to be honest, there really isn't much there. That's the extent of the line of argumentation from the One Westers. Really, that's it, right? They'll make the appeal to the Paleo script. They'll look at something like the Moabite stone. In many cases, they'll look at dubious artifacts like the Back Creek stone and say, oh, look, this is Lashawan Qadash, you know, and this is the Abba Gada, you know, whatever. And it's like, but the reality is that, you know, the Paleo script in and of itself is not evidence for the pronunciation, right? So, but yeah, Abu, like I was saying, if you know, if you like, would you like to move on, or do you think that you know, we've done enough in
actually, since you brought up the Taza, right, and since we're going to transition into the transliterations, I think if I want to show an image that we showed before, is one of my old tweets. I have it ready. I can share it if that's cool with you.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So this also will tie into the thing with Tahar saying, well, you know, we don't have a time machine, so we can't go back to the time of Christ. But actually, in a sense, we can. You know, not in the sense of an actual time machine, but we do have some transliterations that go back that far.
Right.
So just to be clear, are you able to see the image I'm sharing now?
Yes, I can see. Actually, let me present you. All right, there you go.
All right, thank you very much. So this is an image I made years ago. I made this about, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, and I put it up on my Twitter account. For anyone who wants to see my Twitter account, it's Abu Khamar, ABUKHAMR. And this was just something to explore how the claims about Lashawan Qadash line up against transliterations that existed in ancient times and, on through right up until early modern times. And this one, I wanted to show particularly this one because it employs the tzadeh. The second character in Isaac's name, in Yitzhak's name, is the tzadeh. And so as a result, proponents of Lashawan Qadash would say that Isaac's name is truly pronounced Yatazachak. So then I give the examples beneath it. So the first line has the Masoretic text. I know they reject the pointing in the Masoretic text, but I just want to appeal to it to make a point. When you go by the pointing in the Masoretic text, the diacritics in the Masoretic text, it implies that the name is pronounced Yitzhak, right? Or Yitzchak, however you want to pronounce it. Now, they would say, oh, well, these are vocalizations that were added by the Masoretes. But the truth of the matter is, they didn't add sounds to Hebrew. What they did is they added symbols representing vocalizations that existed for centuries. And this is what brings us to the next line. In both the Septuagint and the New Testament, Isaac's name is rendered Isaac. These are ancient transliterations of that Hebrew word, and it's pretty close to what's implied by the Masoretic text. Mm-hmm. The only thing is the Greek treats when the ha is soft, when the chet or the het is soft, they treat it as silent. And that's an interesting subject we got into last time, and we're going to get into it again when we do our series on Lashawan Qadash. So too in the Peshita, it's the pronunciation is Ishaq, right? So too in the Quran, it's Ishaq, and then even in the Vulgate and the King James Bible, it's Isaac, Isaac, or Isaac. And I only bring up the King James Bible because most of the proponents of Lashawan Qadash are King James onlyists. Right. And it does really beg the question, was even King James using Yiddish? And more importantly, how do you explain these ancient transliterations which predate the Masoretic text by many centuries, agreeing with the Masoretic text, essentially? And this happens a lot. And the honest answer is the one that we've been giving for years, which is that not all, but many of the vocalizations in the Masoretic text are found, they go right back to antiquity. And that's the honest answer on that, By
the way, since you mentioned this, I mean, for example, we see Hebrew expressions being transliterated even in the English of the King James. For example, think about the Shibboleth, right? Or think about Mazareth, or Mazareth, right? In the book of Job, if I'm not mistaken. Or, for example, when you see like these specific, like even the fact that cherubim, which would be cherubim, that it's rendered cherubim in the King James, right? Well, although they render it with the S, even though the im would imply plural.
Yeah, they double the plural.
Yeah, they double the plural, right? So they put cherubims. But needless to say, they're still using the standard form of pronunciation of Hebrew that King James and his translators would have known during their time, which is ironic because they believe that King James himself was an Israelite. So why was he using quote unquote Yiddish, even though we know that dialect isn't Yiddish, right? Which is something that we'll bring up in a little bit. But I mean, it's ironic that even the King James bears witness against their dialect,
Mm-hmm.
If I may, against Lashawan Qadash,
another transliteration.
Yep, yeah, go right ahead.
All right, so let me screen share this now real quick, and you let me know if you guys can see that.
Yep, you're good to go, man.
Okay, so what's highlighted here, this is Matthew 27:46, and of course the verse before it and the verses after, but I'm going to focus on specifically Matthew 27:46, which captures Christ's cry on the cross. Now, full disclosure, it may not be Hebrew. It's either, the cry on the cross is either Aramaic, in a form of Aramaic that was very close to Hebrew, or it's Hebrew using an Aramaic verb. Nonetheless, whatever the case, I'm going to highlight the cry on the cross here in the Greek text, right? Now, you see that text there. We can use that to reconstruct the statement that was being transcribed into Greek. And you should be able to see the statement here in the standard Hebrew script. Are you able to see it? Whether it's Aramaic or Hebrew.
Yeah, you're good to go.
Okay. So now, full disclosure, the only thing that's up for grabs, this is pretty standard. The only thing that's up for grabs is the third word, could be the Hebrew lama or it could be the Aramaic lema. So I'm just going to put a little yellow thing above that, whether it's lama or lema. That's the only the thing that might be open for question. Now, whatever the case, this sentence now can also be written in the Phoenician script. And if someone had written down back then, we know from after the time of Christ, just a few decades after Christ was crucified, Bar Kokhba minted coins in the Phoenician script, and right around the same time, the Qumran community also was still using the Phoenician script in some documents. So the Phoenician script did exist in the time of Christ. It was still in use in some way, even though it wasn't the only script being used. So someone could have written Christ's statement down in the Phoenician script, and it would look like this. So there's the statement in the Phoenician script. Now, I want to make a point about how to pronounce these words. So, for example, I'm going to highlight the first two words, right? Eli, Eli, or in the proponents of Lashawan Qadash would say, no, it's pronounced Aliyah, Aliyah. But here's the thing. Suppose we were writing down how we think they're pronounced in the Latin script, right? In the Roman script. So they would write A-L-A-Y-A, right? For Aliyah, and I would write E-L-I. We would write E-L-I for Eli, right? Now, this is significant because the way the Latin script works is even if you didn't have recordings of me and Chapash, us and ISUPK or whatever, even if you didn't have recordings of our voices, you would still know how we thought these words were pronounced based on how we wrote it down in the Latin script, right? So if they spelled it A-L-A-Y-A, that captures their pronunciation, and we write it down E-L-I, that captures our pronunciation. So I want to zero in on this point. The Latin script captures the pronunciation. It captures the way the writer thinks the word is pronounced, right? The Greek text works the same way. So here's an example. The Greek text could have transliterated it alaya, just alpha, lambda, alpha, lambda, iota, alpha, alaya. They could have written that, but instead they wrote Eli. And it begs the question, why did this ancient source render it Eli instead of alaya?
Well, let's just
exactly the way we would say it's pronounced. That's the way it is in the message.
Let's just call it for what it is. Because the reality is that the pronunciation that Lashawan Qadash proponents promote didn't exist back then.
Exactly.
Just didn't exist. And the reality is that here you have Christ. Keep in mind, Lashawan Qadash proponents will assert that Christ's name was Yahushai. So clearly, if his name was quote unquote Yahushai, he would have spoken the dialect, wouldn't he? But yet here you have an actual phrase that he spoke in Hebrew or in a form of Hebrew or whatever the case may be. And he says, Eli, Eli, lama sabatani? Like, again, why didn't he say Ahlaya, Laba, what was it? Laba Shaba Kwabatanya or something like that?
Yeah, actually, that allows me to segue into the end. Let me, if you can see, I've highlighted the last two letters of the statement, right? Because this is also relevant, right? So Shabaktani, the ani at the end, Shabakta is you did it, right? This verb, it's the Shabakta is the verb in the past tense, perfect tense, and it's a second person singular, right? You did this, Shabakta, or if you did it would literally be Pa'alta or something like that, or you wrote would be Katabtas, etc., right? The ni, the ani at the end is the first person singular pronomial suffix, right? It pertains to me or I. Now, that has relevance because it relates to the first person pronoun. The first person pronomial suffix is just sort of being contracted into the verb, and it corresponds to the first person pronoun. In English, the first person pronoun is I, or in Spanish, it's yo. So now I wrote down the first person pronoun in Hebrew. I mean, it appears on the screen in your lower left-hand corner. And it begs a question, well, how is that pronoun pronounced? Those who know Hebrew, standard Hebrew, would say it's pronounced ani, right? And they would say, no, it's pronounced anaya, or the Torah Knights cats would say ane or something like that. But the point is that from this ancient transliteration, this 2,000-year-old transcription, it implies that it actually is pronounced ani, because if it was anaya or ane, that would have been reflected in the transcription. It's not anaya, clearly. Now, again, we get the same kind of situation. Greek could have easily produced it. Greek could have written anaya, right? Just alpha, nu, alpha, iota, alpha could have given you anaya. But instead, they put alpha, nu, iota, ani. And that's interesting. The way they rendered the first person pronomial suffix implies the way they understand the first person pronoun to be pronounced. And I think that's quite interesting.
And also, I think we should also highlight this, which is, I think, the most important thing, that Christ himself didn't speak the so-called dialect that these camps claim is ancient Hebrew. Isn't that interesting? And yet somehow he had the name Yahushai. Well, how do you have the name Yahushai, but you don't actually speak the language? I mean, it's, and we could also point out even just some small things. For example, the fact is that you have Simon, which would, imply Shimon, right?
Yep.
Shimon bar Jonah or Jonas, right? So
yep.
why have bar when you could have easily have rendered ban? Some of these camps would claim that the Hebrew word ben is actually ban. Well, why is it rendered bar?
But more importantly, why Shimon instead of Shamaiwan? They say, they say, oh, the name Shamaiwan, right? That's what they call they always say the Dominicans are Shamaiwan. I mean, come on.
Right.
And or also Yonah. Why Yonah and not Yawana or something like that? Exactly.
I mean, it's just those examples. I mean, and there's so much that we could bring. Oh, how about this one? Since you mentioned some of the pronunciations that they use, can you actually find the one for Yashar Allah? Matter of fact, Brother Jay, are you there, Brother Jay? I think the Brother Jay,
yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, Brother Jay, could you quickly go into the folder and pull up one of the images? It's the Lashawan Qadash image.
I got it as well if you need it. I can also share the link.
You actually have it? Okay. All right. If you could actually pull that up. Well, whichever one of you wants to pull it up, I'll just leave it up to whoever pulls it up first.
You pull it up. Okay, cool. You got the link. All right.
Yeah, I just shared the link. He's going to pull it up.
Yeah. Right. And then so the interesting thing is
that shares from a Twitter account from years ago. This is
right. Actually, Brother Jay, because it actually is in the folder. So instead of actually showing that, it's actually in the folder that you have.
Number one.
Yeah, if you look at where you see where it says LQ,
excuse me.
There's 3 images in there, so it should be either the first or the second image.
Let's see here.
It's in the folder. The LQ it should be in the folder. So it'll be. I'm gonna tell you right now.
Yeah, I see one. Okay.
Yeah, so if you could.
I think y'all. Let me make sure it's right. Let me see. Make sure it's the same thing.
It's last number
1. I got it.
No, number 2. It's actually number 2. Lashawan Qadash number 2. Yeah.
All
right. So I want everybody out there to get an idea of.
Yep, that's it. It's from my old Twitter account.
Right. So they will assert that the Hebrew word there is pronounced Yasha Allah, and yet if you could, my brother.
And by the way, the Torah Knights claim it's Yasher El.
Right. My brother Jay, if you could if you could kind of I don't know if you could do it with your mouse. No, at the bottom, do you see where it says Greek LXX and New Testament? The reason why that's significant is because the Septuagint, the LXX, is the oldest translation of the Bible, correct, Abu? This is the oldest one that we have, and it's in Greek. And here we have the example of how this Hebrew phrase was literally pronounced Yisrael. Now, how does the Masoretic text render it, and how is it pronounced? It's pronounced Yisrael. And here we have all these other examples, and we see uniformity between all these different translations, or even transliterations. So again, as it states at the bottom, were all these sources using quote unquote Yiddish? And again, how easy would it have been to have rendered Yasha Allah? What is it? Yasa Allah in Greek? The iota, the alpha, the sigma.
It could have been done, yeah. Iota alpha would have been for the Ya, and then sigma alpha. So yeah.
So it's amazing that these sort of facts are lost on LQ proponents. But I think this is more than enough to tackle the issues that Qadash. I don't think that he was expecting anybody to rebuttal him this way. And I would hope that if he watches this, that he'll actually take this in and not simply do what the camps do and just, those Christians, they don't know what they're talking about. We know our language, but meanwhile, the evidence is against them.
Actually, before we close on Khapash, I wanna say something. I have something else that we should get into real quick on Khapash. So at the beginning of this section on Khapash, we talked about how he said, they're trying to say we made up the script. That was the implication. He didn't say exactly that. But the thing is, we clarified, no one ever said that the ISUPK made up the script, the Phoenician script, right? But since he brought that up, let's do a little segue into the fact that even though the ISUPK didn't make up, and I'm not talking about the new ISUPK, I'm talking about who they descended from, One West. Even though One West didn't make up the Phoenician script, they did make up a script, ironically enough.
Oh, yeah. The cursive script. I remember that.
Because they were into the cursive relative to, the standard Hebrew script. They were using the so-called Israeli, or even some people call it the Sephardic cursive. They wanted to create a cursive form to the Phoenician script. And if we can, I'd like to pull that up. Let me mention
Oh, you muted yourself. You gotta unmute. Okay, I think he
no, forgive me. Yeah, I was going mute if you want to take it. I just wanted to give the note to Jay in the chat.
Yeah. One of the things that I did want to highlight while you're doing that is the faulty appeal to the fact that, the argument that somehow, some way, if we say that the dialect is false, that we're implying that the script is false. I don't see how that correlates at all. The fact that was his main and only line of argumentation. So, for example, when Cyril told him that the dialect was made up by Ariyah, he immediately asserted that somehow Cyril was claiming that the Paleo script was made up, which is ridiculous, right? It's a horrible argument. But again, as you pointed out, that the original school, the original One West, not the one that Johanna claims is still carrying on the tradition, but the actual original school created a cursive script. They actually created their own script, coincidentally enough. So if the brother Jay, if you have that, or does Abu have it? Do either of you have it? So we can go ahead and show the audience, or okay, there we go. All right.
So this is an old class notes from 1992. These were the part of the class notes that One West 125th Street back then. I think it was called ISUPK. It might not have been called the Israeli Church of Universal Practical Knowledge yet, but whatever the case, these were their class notes, and they gave people the alphabet. So towards the middle, in the middle column, you can see the Phoenician script, and then on the right, you can see they have a script that they completely made up, and that's their.
If you actually zoom in, it's all the way. If you could just zoom in
on the right-hand column.
The right-hand column. Can you zoom in? Can you zoom in, Brother Jay, or? Okay, I don't know if he.
If not, I mean, I could try. Also, that's. Let me see if I got that image.
I don't know if he stepped away, but.
No problem. I mean, I could also.
Yeah. Can you zoom in, Brother Jay, all the way to the right?
To the right. Okay, let's see.
If you zoom in as much as you possibly can, man.
On that column on the right, different parts of it, if possible. Beautiful. Yeah. Now move it if you can move. Yeah. There you go. Perfect.
Yep. And then if you could kind of scroll up so the people can see the top portion all the way. Yeah. There you go. That's right. Right. Actually, zoom out just a little bit so it's not so pixelated. Just a little bit.
No, it's cool. Actually, later on we should zoom in on the bottom right later on.
Okay.
In a little while. But yeah, basically the gist of it is that, and this is so ironic because on the left you see the Phoenician script, on the right you see the script that they made up. Their attempt to create a cursive version of the Phoenician script, and they definitely made this up. But it's interesting that Khapash was saying, they're accusing us of making up the script, and no, we didn't accuse him of that. But since he brought it up, ironically, there was a script that was made up. And if we can we scroll down all the way to the bottom and zoom in?
To the bottom. Yeah, if you could scroll down all the way to the bottom, Brother Jay. Yeah.
Here we go. Because we're going to see the name of this script. Yeah, right there. Let's see if we can we move over slightly to the left?
Yeah, to the left.
There we go. Perfect. It says the writing is, oh wait, go a little bit more to the left. I'm sorry.
Yeah. If you could highlight it too with the so the audience.
So there it is right there. You see it says the name of the writing. So this script, yeah, perfect.
Yep.
They say the name of the writing is Arya Ma Shah. Arya and Ma Shah basically told on themselves in the notes. They named the cursive version of the Phoenician script Arya Ma Shah, and they put it.
I want you to repeat that one more time. They named the cursive version. We're not saying they named the Paleo script, the Phoenician script. We're saying that they made a cursive version, which we just saw on the screen. So, for example, if you look on the chart, on the left-hand column, you have the actual Paleo / Phoenician script. And then on the right-hand column, you have the cursive script, right? The one that they made, I guess as you were pointing out, a cursive version of the Paleo or / Phoenician script. And they named that cursive version Arya Masha.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's and can we scroll a little bit more to the right? Forgive me. I'm sorry. I know we're jumping all around. And there it is right there. If we can zoom in, that's their cursive, and that's literally Arya Masha. That's them writing the name of their made-up script in the made-up script. Now, the thing is, someone like Chapash, she probably came in, later on. He might say, well, I don't even know what this is. Like, how do we, can we get some corroboration on that is the question.
Right.
Aside from the fact that we have the old notes, 25-year-old notes.
Didn't Johanna mention something about this? If I'm not mistaken, I think we talked about this a little bit.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. We don't have a clip at the moment, but we'll get one later on and maybe show it later on. But there is, Johanna has mentioned that. He said in one of his buildings, probably, I'm guessing the one in New York, one of his locations, he mentions that they still got a script that's like the Arabic script. And he says, it's right there on the wall. The camera doesn't pan to it. But the point is, Johanna himself has said they still got this script on their wall somewhere in one of their locations. But what I was going to say is, that Johanna admitting that they still use the script, they still have it on the wall, doesn't mean it was just made up, created by Masha and Arya. So I'm wondering if we could show that clip of Nathaniel, of the former Nathaniel Alaga, former member of One West, who's now the head of IUIC. You think we could pull up that video?
Yeah, Brother Jay, if you could pull it up. It is the all right.
Cool. You said the IRC one, right?
Yeah, the IUIC the
thing.
Entertainer.
All right.
Yeah. All right, there you go.
Yeah, before we play this, just to set this up. So again, we showed already from the notes from the 90s that they had this made up script. The funny thing is, Masha told Nathaniel Alaga, now Nathaniel, the head of IUIC, that he made it up. We're going to see that in this clip, this brief clip from Sam Kestenbaum's interview with Nathaniel. Here we go.
And were you using the holy tongue, as they say?
No, we had stopped by that time. By 12 tribes, we had stopped.
House of David, you were using?
House of David, we were still doing it. Okay. And Masha was still going to jokes and say, do you know what you just read in Hebrew? We go, no.
Okay, so you're kind of suggesting or telling me that Masha was kind of anti.
He never read it. He'd just sit there. And then he would ask us to translate. We never could.
So you're saying that other elders kind of promoted
yes,
that language in Masha was
right,
kind of anti that language.
Correct.
Probably like specifically right. This would be like Arya's thing.
I know we had the
was Arya the person who revealed or introduced that language to the community? Okay.
They had a Hebrew script which looked very similar to Arabic. It looked similar to that. So I remember sitting down with Masha. I said, hey, where can I find this? I could go to books and see the ancient Hebrew in what's that guy's name? Who wrote the Hebrew? What's his name? From Jerusalem. Ben Yehuda, right. Eliezer Ben Yehuda. Thank you, brothers. Eliezer Ben Yehuda. You familiar with him?
Yes.
He's the one from 1948, around that time, who concocted. Can I use that word? Concocted today's Hebrew. And when you read about him, he took the words from Arabic, Germany, France, and made a new language. And when the Caucasian from World War II, from the Caucasian who came from Poland, Ukraine, Russia, came to the land, they had to study his new form of Hebrew. You understand what I'm saying? You look confused.
No, I'm with you.
He's looking at me like, what are you saying?
No, I'm with you.
Okay, so that language made up. That's not the pure language. And this is what many Israelite camps argue over. And never understanding what we read earlier, Zephaniah 3:8 and 9.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that?
Yes.
What did it say?
Yeah. But the language will come,
exactly. Time. So they reject it and go, no, we have to do this language.
Mm-hmm.
That was going.
But they were kind of, but they also weren't using the white man's language. They were using different. I hadn't heard this kind of Arabicized.
Oh, I'm glad you reminded me about that. So I asked Masha, I said, I can see the ancient Hebrew in books like Eliezer ben Yehuda. Well, where did the script come from? He said, we made that up. I said, oh, wow. So all that always stuck in my mind. It always stayed with me. So I didn't make a big thing of it. I just filed it.
So there you go. So he basically admits that the cursive script was made up, right? Basically.
Yeah. So we got it in the notes. The fact that they named it, the fact that it can't be found anywhere, this cursive script can't be found anywhere, is evidence that it was made up. The fact that they named it after themselves, Arya Masha, is evidence that they made it up. And now you got someone who met them, who spoke with them directly, and he says that they told them flat out, yeah, we made it up.
So real quick, and just as a point, because I know how some of these camps do. They'll hear where he mentioned Eliezer ben Yehuda, and unfortunately, Nathaniel makes ignorant arguments, as many of these camps do. Although he doesn't promote the so-called Paleo Hebrew anymore, he still seems to cast doubt on the what today is known as modern Israeli Hebrew. He basically made the assertion that it's a completely new, or something to that effect. Like it's a new language. It's not the pure tongue or something like that. Making the appeal to Zephaniah 3:9, which is not talking about the Hebrew language, by the way. I don't know where they get this idea that that's talking about the Hebrew language. Not even the context of the chapter, lends any sort of credibility to that notion. Which, by the way, that's what Lashawan Qadash proponents will use, right? When they want to try to justify the dialect, they'll run to Zephaniah 3:9. But Abu, could you very quickly, very briefly, tackle the issue of Eliezer ben Yehuda and why their argument doesn't really have legs to stand on, even from Nathaniel?
Well, to be fair, we're not like endorsing modern Israeli Hebrew in toto. I mean, we're not, because modern Israeli Hebrew is quite close to biblical Hebrew, but they're not identical, and we fully acknowledge that. I think what happens with a lot of, now I don't want to blame Nathaniel too much, because I think he was very careful with his language, but a lot of the proponents of Lashawan Qadash, which I'm referring to people other than him, they have this very poor understanding of what exactly happened with Eliezer ben Yehuda. He resurrected the language. And yes, some of it he filtered through an understanding of Arabic. And at one point he even wrote, I think in one of his notebooks, he wrote down, Hebrew is Arabic. He was very impressed with how, and a lot of Semiticists are very impressed with the way Arabic can sort of unlock our understanding of Hebrew. A little bit that comes up in our discussions with Judah Natsara, which is coming up. But aside from that, now the thing is, he was resurrecting an ancient language. And so there were lots of concepts that didn't exist in Hebrew prior to that. So obviously you need
modern terms, right?
Yeah. So for example, like the bus, they used autobus. That's the modern Israeli Hebrew refers to the bus. Like when you get on the bus, is autobus.
So they incorporated Ladino and these different
all kinds of stuff. Yeah. Or like for example, psychology. Like what would be the biblical Hebrew word for psychology? This is a concept that was created in the modern time. So so in modern Israeli Hebrew, it's psikologia. Yes, they borrowed words. Many languages borrowed words.
History would be historia, right? So
stuff like that, yeah.
So, but
the analogy I would give is that imagine if English stopped as a spoken language, in I don't know, 1980 or something like that, and we were going to resurrect it now.
But hold on one second, because I think there's another underlying theme with this topic as well, is that the language was still being used as a liturgical language. It now was like basically not being used as a spoken every day-to-day language, But liturgically, whenever these different groups of Jews in their synagogues, especially when they were reading old manuscripts or composing something or doing anything of that nature, anything liturgical, anything religious, then obviously the Hebrew language was incorporated in those instances. However, it was not being used as a day-to-day, like for example, how we're talking in English right now. Now, granted, it's possible that they amongst themselves spoke in the language, right? But as far as speaking to your countrymen, going to the town, asking for like a loaf of bread, and then using the language, it wasn't being used in that way. So I guess you could say that in a sense it was a quote unquote dead language, but not that the language was like in absolute non-use. Which is, I think, what the some Lashawan Qadash proponents are promoting, this whole idea that the language wasn't, that this language, in fact, they'll even say that the language is just flat out made up.
Ridiculous. Here's the thing. It would be interesting. I'd love to sit down with a proponent of Lashawan Qadash who wants to say that and really press them on what exactly their objections are, because I don't think they have any grammatical objections to modern Israeli Hebrew. And now, of course, you'll see them point out that modern Israeli Hebrew has lots of words that didn't exist in biblical Hebrew. And of course, like we already said, Sicarii, everything. What would be the Hebrew word for cell phone or something like that, But nonetheless, they themselves, you'll see a lot of these guys sort of create new words to grab modern concepts, I remember seeing a bishop in the ICGJC try to refer to himself as a hacker in Hebrew, but as a computer hacker, or talk about addiction and all this kind of stuff. So they themselves, if they were going to actually use this language, they would have to adopt new words and come up with new structures that didn't exist in biblical Hebrew. So I don't think they really have a leg to stand on in terms of new vocabulary. Really, the objections between proponents of Lashawan Qadash, the objections proponents of Lashawan Qadash have to modern Israeli Hebrew is really on pronunciation. That's really what it boils down to. So now,
this is mainly centered on Aria's belief that, or his new invention, or if whoever it was, whether it was Aria or whoever it was in the school that decided to foist this idea onto everybody. The truth of the matter is that it was promoted as, well, there are only two vowel sounds, right? And in the original school, if something was codified as doctrine, you had to promote it or you got out, right? There was no if, ands, or buts. This is what we teach. If you don't like it, go find somewhere else, right? Really as simple as that. And so a lot of these guys, in many cases, went against their own convictions, if they even had any at the time. And truth be told, they basically just promoted what they thought was quote unquote the truth, because hey, Arya, Masha, and the other elders said it, so it must be true. Nobody actually, isn't it funny how a lot of these guys will have an extreme skepticism towards everything else except for their own doctrines, right? Their doctrines are everything is untouchable. Anything is untouchable except if it's anything that our opponents are saying. Then at that point it's just don't believe it.
Right. But what I was going to say is, so when proponents of Lashawan Qadash object to modern Israeli Hebrew, they're not objecting on grounds of grammar. They don't have grammatical objections, right? Because they don't really get into the grammar, to be honest. Like how to conjugate verbs. Barely do they get into that. And what they produce is exactly the same as modern Israeli Hebrew. They don't really have a leg to stand on new vocabulary, because they themselves occasionally flirt with creating new vocabulary. And even if they were to produce this new language, it would beg the question, how do you refer to all these things that aren't mentioned in the Bible? They would have to either create neologisms based on, certain roots, or they would just bring a word in, just borrow a word straight from another language, which, by the way, even happens with the biblical text. Like in Daniel, you see the word symphonia, which is from the Greek symphonia, symphony, but whatever the case.
Right.
So they don't have any objections, really. They don't have strong objections on new vocabulary, which is, yes, there's lots of new vocabulary in modern Israeli Hebrew. Really, it boils down to pronunciation. And their whole thing is, now, as a disclaimer, we're not claiming that the pronunciations in modern Israeli Hebrew line up perfectly with the ancient evidence.
Right.
Nonetheless, by and large, it does. Now, with that in mind, the real dispute between proponents of Lashawan Qadash and modern Israeli Hebrew would be that the question of A, whether or not Hebrew characters or Hebrew phonemes can be vocalized in multiple ways, and whether or not there are vocalizations beyond their ah and I sounds. Now, obviously, modern Israeli Hebrew says that yes, there are lots of different vocalizations for each character. And in that sense, at least on that point of dispute, the ancient evidence supports modern Israeli Hebrew and does not support Lashawan Qadash. And, you know,
Right.
yeah, and we can trace it. We can go from the ancient transliterations to the Masoretic text to the modern Israeli Hebrew renderings, and there is considerable continuity. There's some differences along the way, but there's, by and large, considerable continuity.
Right. And very quickly, before we actually get to the Torah Night portion, Brother Jay, as a former IUIC guy, you guys were kind of discouraged from dealing with anything concerning the, you know, underlying languages of the Bible, right? Especially, you know, if you're looking at Hebrew or anything like that, or Greek. Could you kind of share, you know, some of your experience with that? And also, you know, what was Nathaniel's or some of the other guys, what were their view of the so-called Hebrew that these other camps would promote? Like, how would they perceive it?
He would commonly joke about it and call it I think it's like Hebonics or something like that.
Right.
And he would also call different little things he would make up or whatever to poke fun at it. He would do. So, you know, as you imagine, the school itself doesn't go by that. Also, in terms of like looking into the underlying text, you know, whether it be the Greek or the Hebrew, it's discouraged from the brothers and sisters. You know, they, at least when I was there, they were constantly told, we were constantly told to stay away from the blue letter. The only time they would go to these things is if it was something that they was to try to use that was really compelling, and only the elders would use it. And they wouldn't stay in it. Like, you're not going to see them constantly like going into the underlying text and stuff.
Esau's book, even though I did that.
Right. So, and so every once in a while, you see them pull up something like that may show some kind of Greek or Hebrew word when they think they've really got something, but it's not something that they stay in, and the members don't really go into it as well. We was discouraged from doing it. I remember the whole time that I was there, we never looked into the any underlying text or anything. They might start to kind of bend on it now, maybe, who knows, because we bring it out so much, and they almost got no choice if they want to kind of
hold on. If I could bring up something, up something very quickly, in your interaction with Rick Judah, who I believe was formerly of IUIC,
right?
Man, that dude did not want you. He was basically trying to tell you like ain't no underlying text that you can look at. Like, what you doing?
He said, you know, yeah, that brother Rick Judah Israel, he at least in 2016 we do have that evidence that he was part of IUIC. But I think he's kind of rogue because he's doing things they don't normally do.
Right. But he was fighting you hard.
Yeah, he was fighting hard, man. And so he equated the underlying text in the Hebrew as to not be in the Bible. He thinks the Bible is just King James Version because he speaks English. But that's why, you know, of course, you know the conversation. But he equates the underlying text in the Hebrew to not be in the Bible.
Well, let me just say this real quick, and why I believe that, you know, that's even a greater extreme, right? So you basically get rid of the so-called dialect, which we already know is not ancient Hebrew.
Right.
But man, some of these guys, at least in the case of Rick Judah Israel, man, they're going as far as to say, man, they don't even deal with any, like, no script. Like, they don't deal with no manuscripts if it's in Hebrew or Greek or anything like that. Like,
right. They don't look into the early church fathers, nothing, man.
But I mean, but mainly in terms of the languages, man.
Right.
So when you kept telling him, what is that word Lord there? He's like, well, I don't know. He's like, that's that.
It's like, you know, that's not the Bible. Show me a Bible verse, but he wants you to show you a Hebrew word in an English version. And that's not going to work, brother.
Right. You know, but that is unfortunate, man. But it is interesting to see your viewpoint coming from IUIC, coming out of IUIC, where they didn't have the same, you know, this whole tradition of the so-called pronunciations that the other camps do, like the other one Westers. But yeah, you know, I think this would be an excellent segue now to kind of go into the whole thing with the Torah Knights. Now, Abu, here you have a group who are non-one Westers, and yet they have embraced the dialect. Initially, it seemed like they were embracing it all, but then little by little, Judah Netzara has begun to revise and to do different things. But I think he's going to the point where it's almost like, it's almost sad, right? I mean, now he's casting doubt on the mere fact that the language can be called Hebrew, you know? So, and so our initial discussion with Judah Netzara began with, the whole, the whole issue of Lashawan Qadash, right? I believe that we were initially supposed to do a debate that fell through because, well, Judah can be very hard-headed, and I guess he didn't agree with the title of the debate. And so what ended up happening was he made a video. We responded to it. It was mainly him hurling ad hominems our way. We responded to his video by showing why the arguments for that dialect that he is currently revising are false. We showed why the evidence, as you were pointing out, even for the dialect being used today, modern Israeli Hebrew, has many pronunciations that are ancient. Not saying that they're all streamlined, but again, the modern Israeli dialect in its most ancient pronunciations lines up with the extant evidence, whereas Judah Netzara's dialect has no evidence, right? Especially with the polemics that he's been raising. And little by little, it seems like he's been revising the pronunciations to the point where it's almost like he's starting to kind of lean into some form of orthodoxy in terms of how one would look at the pronunciations and vowels and all those different things, except that he contradicts himself. So I'm almost looking at him as a contrarian. Like, he just basically doesn't want to be wrong. So if he can undermine his own position in the process of not losing an argument, he'll do that just so he doesn't lose, which is crazy if you really think about it. But eventually that led to Lamad, if I'm not mistaken, an individual named Lamad making a video.
Basically a student of Matzada or a member of the Torah Knights.
Right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit.
Is it okay if I show an image? I just want to mention, because I find it's really, we're going to respond to Lamad's argument, which is an adaptation of Judah's argument, but it's honestly, it's unfortunate and it's hard to take serious because it's such a divergence from the real issue. So I wanted, if I could, to show an image just to touch on what the real issues are, just so they have the graphic.
Definitely.
Okay, hold on one second. Let's put this up. Okay. All right, let me know if you can see that. So here's the thing. The real salient points of the dispute, and this is stuff that we covered in our debate with, not debate, excuse me, forgive me, but in one of our videos that we did, the video we did on December 16th, titled Responding to Judah Netzara's Misunderstanding of Hebrew, that video on your account, right? We covered these issues. The real salient points: number one, whether the characters or phonemes in Semitic languages can be vocalized in multiple ways. Number two, whether the diacritics employed in Semitic languages like the Masoretic text and now certain Arabic text, whether these diacritics introduce new vocalizations or merely symbolized already existing vocalizations. And then number three, which way the ancient evidence points. These are the real issues in our dispute with Judah Netzara and also with any other proponent of Lashawan Qadash.
Let me just stop you very quickly. Let me just stop you. And I want to point something else out. The reason why we are even engaging in this issue is because Judah Netzara, as many sacred namers tend to do, is very, just very an ardent proponent of saying Yahweh, right? So he thinks that God's name is only pronounced Yahweh, right? He doesn't believe that God's name is pronounced Yahweh, as is traditionally understood. And even in the way that some of these other novice Hebrew Israelites would pronounce it, like Yahuwah or whatever, which I have a problem with, and that'll be another topic for another day. But needless to say, he has an issue with, and you saw the video with vocab, right, where he was like pressing him, say Yahweh Akkad, right? And vocab was like, I don't agree with that pronunciation. And then immediately they asserted that, oh, look, vocab is denying God, or something ridiculous like that, right? But it's mainly based on the pronunciation that they incorporate. And so later on that would lead to me wanting to engage him because I felt that it was a ridiculous argument, especially since he cannot prove that specific pronunciation, right? And then here we are now after various videos, and from his side, his videos have mainly been ad hominem attacks and not really dealing with any of the issues that we've presented to him. And now, Lamad decided to step up, and he no disrespect to him, he didn't do any better than Judah did. It's really poor argumentation from both of them.
Well, they're literally ignoring the salient arguments. That's the thing. The last two videos, the most recent video is from Lamad. The previous, and it was, by the way, it was shown on Judah's page. Judah Natsara basically hosted the video or reposted it, whatever you want to say. But that video, as well as Judah's previous video, ignored all these salient arguments, that the ones that we have on the screen right here, that these are the real issues. These, in our previous video, especially our video on December 16th, this is what we got into. This is the salient point. This is the stuff that really counts. They ignored all of that, and they instead want to jump into a hair-splitting, trifling argument about the precise word that you use to refer to the language. Suddenly, they have a problem with us calling the language Hebrew. Now, originally, Judah Natsara, his thing was like he would just go to these different texts and be like, well, I don't see the word Hebrew. I don't see the word Hebrew there, as if this English word is required to appear in the Hebrew text of the Bible. We're going to show Lamad summing up his argument. It's a slight variation. He doesn't require us to have the English word Hebrew in the Hebrew text. His thing is that the word Hebrew refers to a people. It does not refer to a language. And I think I'm going to stop sharing this image, and I think we're going to show a clip of Lamad basically summing up his argument, and then we'll respond to it.
Right. Hey, yes, the video entitled Lamad, Jay. All right.
Okay, so let's break this down again. Hebrew is Yahweh the Yup. Okay, that's the name of the language. That is the name of the language, not Hebrew. Okay, Hebrew is referred to a person or a stock of people, a group of people as well. That's why they call them the Hebrews. Okay, and then Yahweh the Yah and Yahweh the Yum are referred to the people in the same way.
All right, so that's the gist of their argument. His basic, and you notice on the screen you'll see Abar Yah, that he's a little diverging a little bit there. It's Judah pronounces it Abar Abare, and before they used to call it Abari. Whatever the case. Yeah, they're changing a little bit, and we're going to show that a little bit. But the point is, the Hebrew word for, or whatever the biblical word for the language, their point is the word that we would translate Hebrew, which they pronounce like we would say Ivrit with a tav at the end, with a tav at the end. But whatever the case, they say that the word that gets translated Hebrew only applies to a people. You can't apply it to a language, right? So you can't say Hebrew to refer to language. This is honestly, I'm really not trying to be disrespectful, but it's a childish argument, and it's an example of them moving the goalposts. I sincerely believe that because they couldn't deal with the real argument, with the stuff about the ancient evidence and the issue of whether or not you can Hebrew characters can have multiple vocalizations, the real central issue of the disagreement, because they couldn't deal with that, they instead make up this false controversy about us referring to the language as Hebrew. And the thing is, this is a new rule that they just made up because they've been consistently referring to the language as Hebrew and as Abare or Abadi, and we're going to show the evidence of that if we can.
Right. And, to be perfectly honest, man, I mean, and here's the thing, because I think we're going to point this out as well. They make the appeal to he made the appeal to 2 Kings, and he thought that somehow, some way, this is, this is it. This is like the trump card. You can't beat this, right? Until he realizes what we're going to see a little later, But we'll get into that in a moment. We'll get into that a little bit. But we're gonna find out a little later how an actual Israelite from antiquity looked at that same verse that he made an appeal to.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get into that. But for now, I want to show some examples of how, just recently, 2017, they themselves, it wasn't until we made our video on December 16th that all of a sudden after that in January, they're coming out with a new rule that you can't call the language Hebrew. So I'd like to show if Jay, if you could pull up the clip, we got the Judah in the Hebrew. We got a couple of clips we want to show.
Yeah.
So what we're going to show,
we've
been calling it Hebrew and Abari and Abare for quite some time. So I believe this is it.
Right. So
Oh,
for
no.
Torah Israelites, this is our heritage, right? Like, we got books.
Wait. You got to stop that. No. Wait. Wait, go to the beginning, man. I mean, we're allowed to have a little fun. Come on, it's late. We can have some fun, man. Wait. What is this? Wait, you got to go to the way to the beginning, all the way. Wait. Play the clip. Wait. What's that? Oh man,
you know what that is? That's he does to everyone who disagrees with. You disagree with me, so I'm going to show a picture of a raccoon. And I'm going to call you. Videos are filled with these pictures of raccoons.
Hey man, look. I can laugh at the ignorance of others, but hey man, I mean this is funny though. All right. Let's go ahead. All right,
just to set this up. He's going to complain about rival Israelite groups that he feels they're not studying the way he studies.
Right. But by the way, before we play, is there a lot of vulgarity in this clip?
No. It's fine.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, Jay.
Right. So for Torah Israelites, this is our heritage, right? Like, we got dudes trying to go into other books and they didn't master their own book, right? So that's why they don't get too deep in the Hebrew and whatever. They believe in Christ and all this madness, all that, right? That's what it is. They're Gentiles spiritually. You know what I'm saying? Like,
All right, so that's it. The point is, I just want to show that clip. We're going to show a lot more of that. But the point is, this is 2017, and Judah Natsara himself is referring to the language as Hebrew. They just made up this new rule that now you can't refer to it as Hebrew. Like all of a sudden, it's a problem when they themselves were doing it. Now, I think that this isn't the only thing we're going to show. We're going to get into the actual argument itself. But I just want to show that it's a new rule. We have another clip that we're going to show in a moment, if we could. Let's see.
The other Judah one?
Yeah. Now, to set this next clip up, this is Judah Natsara's notes where he was trying to show the similarities between Hebrew and Arabic, right? Now, what I want you to notice is, first off, we're going to help you. We're going to point out every time he refers to the language as Hebrew. That's number one. Number two, at the very beginning, notice that you'll see it in a second. He has, like you should see on the screen, he has the word Arabic written in the top of the column at the top of the page. He also has the word Hebrew written at the top of the column to the left of what's currently on your screen. So clearly, in 2017, he was still referring to the language as Hebrew. But let's play this, and we'll point out every time he calls it Hebrew. Go ahead.
Blood in Hebrew is dam. It's dam in Arabic. Brother is ak in Hebrew. It's ak in Arabic.
Wait, Jay. Wait. You run it back a little bit because so the thing isn't on the. Yeah, so the audience can actually see the text. Yeah, there you go. All right.
Blood in Hebrew is dam. It's dam in Arabic. Brother is ak in Hebrew. It's ak in Arabic. Camel is I'm sorry, I'm trying to get the focus in here. Camel is Gamal. It's Jamal in Arabic. Child is Yalad in Hebrew. It's Walad in Arabic. The day is Yom in Hebrew. It's Yom in Arabic. Death is Math or Mawath in Hebrew. It's Mawat in Arabic. A dog is Kalab in Hebrew. It's Kalb in Arabic. A donkey is Kamar in Hebrew. It's Himar in Arabic. Earth is it's like Alam in Hebrew, Alam in Arabic. I is Ayan in Hebrew. It's Ayin, Ayan, Ayin in Hebrew, or in Arabic, I'm sorry. Father is Abba in Hebrew, it's Ab in Arabic. Flame is Lahab in Hebrew, it's Lahab in Arabic. All right? In Yiddish, it's Lahav. They replaced the B. Okay? But you don't see Yiddish in the script. Okay, you'll notice that they pronounce their things way different, such as, let me give you another example. The word for hair is sha'ar in Hebrew, and it's sha'ar in Arabic, but it's sa'er in Yiddish. Head is rosh in Hebrew, it's ras in Arabic, and like rosh, I'm sorry, it's ras in Ethiopic and rosh in Yiddish. Heart is lab in Hebrew, it's qualab in Arabic, and it's lev in Yiddish. Heaven is shamayam in Hebrew, it's sama'a in Arabic, and it's shamayim in Yiddish.
Right.
All right, that dragged on a little bit, but the point is, you see him over and over again. This is Hebrew, this is Hebrew, this is
Hebrew, right? And
he had
so,
Hebrew written at the top of the page. I mean, so this is a new rule that they made up. I mean, it's really childish. But
well, real quick, if we could, just since we saw that, and again, you know how these guys are. If we don't address it, then they're gonna say, "Oh, see, look, it was right in front of them, and he tried to pick the least significant thing." Blah blah blah. Abu, what are some of the faulty? What's the faulty logic in his using that? Basically to try to create this. Like almost like try to stack the deck and try to make it seem like the pronunciation system that he has is somehow lining up perfectly with Arabic or something to that effect. Could you, as someone who knows Arabic, obviously, could you highlight some of the things that he was doing and for the audience out there who might not be able to catch it, if any of the things that he said may supposedly seem persuasive?
Well, so the thing is, obviously there are words in Arabic and Hebrew that have that vocalization. Nobody's denying that. But he sort of, like you said, he stacks the deck a little bit. He sort of only goes for those words, but he even slipped up a little bit in his notes. We showed it in our previous video, I think was it the one in December? It might have been the one after that, where we showed that in his notes. Yeah, it wasn't the one in December. He included the first person plural pronoun, nahnu, in Arabic, which has a when you transliterate it in the Latin script, it has a U at the end. And also, even in his own text, he had kul for all at the very top of the screen. So, he did slip up. There are words in Hebrew and Arabic that have a vocalizations, and there's words in Hebrew and Arabic that have vocalizations that the Torah Knights and proponents of Lashawan Qadash claim aren't part of Semitic languages, or at least not part of Hebrew, you know? And so, yeah, that's the gist on that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's pretty straightforward in that. Do we have another clip of Judah? I think we were going to play another one.
Actually, what I wanted to do is I was figuring we could show we do have another clip coming up, but what I wanted to show was his Facebook posts, if I could.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
So give me a second, and what I'll do is, here we go. I'm just going to share this. Again, this is just to show that he's been using this whole thing with he's been using not only the word Hebrew, but also his attempt to refer to the Hebrew language in Hebrew. So he used to say Abari or Abari, because I guess he sort of wanted to model it on Arabic, to be honest.
And Abu, just for the audience, so we can get a little clarification. Once again, the reason we're doing this is because they are now making the argument that a person cannot use the English term Hebrew, correct?
Well, no, that was sort of Judah's argument, but now they said you can use the word Hebrew, but only in reference to persons.
To persons, right? But you can't use it for the language, right? Let me correct this, right? That you cannot use the term Hebrew for the language, even though he clearly was using the term Hebrew for the language.
Exactly. He was calling it Hebrew right there as of late 2017. He was still doing it. It's only after he couldn't deal with our actual arguments that they created this new, honestly, a false controversy. Right. But just to look at some of his Facebook posts, and then we'll jump into something more recent. But
even though this is from 2012, but it's still something.
Yeah, we're going to show some old stuff, and then we're going to jump to something recent. But this is a Facebook post. You notice underlined at the bottom. He says, he's complaining about like Muslims and Israelites and stuff like that. And at this word's underlined at the bottom, he says, at least Muslims know Arabic, but Israelites don't know Abari or Abadi, or however he was pronouncing it back then. Now he claims the Hebrew language is called Abare, right? But the point is, there he is. He's using the Hebrew word for Hebrew in reference to a language. And here's another example. He says, he's complaining about other Israelite groups that, use different pronunciations from him. And he says they call Hebrew, which is Abari, Ivri. He doesn't like people referring to the language as Ivri, actually Ivrit. But nonetheless, he's trying to say you got to refer to the language as Abari, right? And for example, another one, he's given a verse here from Isaiah. His attempt to transcribe it is at the bottom of the post, but underlined, I capture, he's saying that this is how the verse reads in Abari. He's referring to the language as Abari, his attempt to pronounce the Hebrew word for Hebrew, which is precisely what Lamad said we can't do. Here's another example. The Abari Hebrew says, and then he gives a transliteration from Exodus, right? His attempt to transcribe it, and so on down the line. Here's the thing. He's talking about he believes there's similarities between,
as I compare both Hebrew
and Japanese.
Right.
There are many similarities to the language, such as, and then he goes on to say that he's trying to give the word for bear on the third line there, Hebrew. He's using Hebrew as a language.
Or his version of Hebrew, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or when he's complaining about GOCC, referring to God as a Haya, he said this is called buffoonery and lack of understanding of Hebrew. He's referring to the language as Hebrew. And here, you notice he's quoting the Quran here.
Wait. Can you do me a favor? Can you zoom in on the date? October 18th, 2000.
Yeah, let me see if I can zoom in. I don't know how to look on your screen. Hold on one second. Let me see.
No, that's all good. Yeah. I mean, that's good. People can see it. Yep.
Okay. All right. Yeah. October. So yeah, this is 2017. Those other posts were old. And the funny thing is,
this was only a few months ago.
Yeah.
I mean, this wasn't even that long. October.
Yeah. Actually, it would be good to zoom in. Let's see if I can zoom in. I don't know how it'll look on your.
Yeah. That's good. Yep.
It's a little sloppy, unfortunately. It's pixelated, but
October 16th, 2017. So let's
somebody
say, this is another one from 5 years ago, from 7 years ago. Here you have one from a few months ago.
Exactly. And this is the last one I'm going to show. But so he at the top he has a verse from the Quran, and the funny thing is he has the very diacritics that he wants to attack. By the way, he also says there's no use in Arabic and Hebrew. He's clearly still referring to the language as Hebrew as recently as last October.
Right.
That this is a new rule they created. But also he has the very diacritics that he rejected, I guess.
No, but this is the amazing thing. In our conversation in December, he referred to the language as Hebrew. What is he talking about?
Yeah. It's a new rule. It's completely new.
He made it. Now, either he made it up on the fly because he realized that he was losing the basically the back and forth. He was losing it. So I guess now he's just trying to grasp at straws, and they're basically just gonna, on the fly make up this new rule. Well, don't call it Hebrew. Meanwhile, he was calling it Hebrew as recently as December. What is this guy talking about?
Exactly. I want to share one other thing. Check this out. We mentioned this before in the controversy over Lashawan Qadash. Can you see this? Yeah, you can see it. When they were trying to pretend like, well, we don't use Lashawan Qadash. That's something that, One West got from those Edomite rabbis and all that. And turns out Torah Knight members were using Lashawan Qadash. And then, but not only that, look at this. He wrote Lashawan Qadash, the Abare language. And this is also from 2017. He's literally referring to Lashawan Qadash, Abare.
Damaging evidence, man.
Yeah.
Damaging evidence
it's
against
a completely new rule that they made up. They didn't want to. I wanted to say this. I can't say it enough. The real core of our dispute was on whether or not there's multiple vocalizations for each Hebrew character, and which way and also whether or not like the Masoretic text, when the diacritics, do those introduce new vocalizations, or are they just symbols representing vocalizations that have existed for a long time, and which way the ancient evidence points. Those were that's the real core of our dispute. Judah,
you know what?
All of that, and so has Lamad. He's ignored all of it, and they only want to focus on this false controversy about whether or not you can refer to the language as Hebrew or Abare or whatever they want to call it.
Abu? You know what? This is a perfect segue, because since he made those arguments, while they haven't addressed our arguments, we're going to address their faulty arguments. So let's do something right now. Let's begin to tear apart Lamad's arguments and show that the ancient evidence destroys whatever sort of ideas that he's trying to present and trying to, basically trick the people into believing. So if we could, would you like to bring out the Josephus example first, and then we can kind of work our way?
Yeah, let me. If I could I show Sirach first, and then we'll get into the real
Sure,
thing.
yeah, we could do Sirach first. Yeah,
Josephus will blow it all up, but just as a segue, because they could say at this point, okay, we just created this fake controversy, but just a few months ago we were in error. Yes, we were doing it, but we were in error. So now there's a new rule that you can't refer to the language as Hebrew. Okay, all right, So, but let's look at something interesting. It's hold on, let me share this real quick. And you let me know if you can see that on your screen.
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, so this is from now I just wanted to use this because it's from Codex Sinaiticus. This is Codex Sinaiticus. This is the prologue to Sirach. If I'm not mistaken, you said they might still believe in the so-called Apocrypha. They might recognize Sirach as scripture. But whatever the case, this is Sirach is an ancient text. It's a pre-Christian text. And at least within the Sinaiticus manuscript, which is, you can see, I'm going to highlight a few letters here, right? And it spells out the word Hebraisti. Now, people can check their own versions of Sirach, or also known as Ecclesiasticus. In the prologue, right at the beginning, he talks about how a phrase in Hebrew might have a different sense in when you translate it into Greek. And when he talks about Hebrew, he refers to it as Hebraisti. He takes the word for Hebrew and puts this suffix on it to represent it as a language. So the reason why I point this out is because this is evidence that ancient Jews understood that you could use the word Hebrew to refer to the language.
Right. By the way, Jay, can you do me a favor? I'm going to send you the link. Can you actually present it? Because I'm having issues on my end. If you could present it on your end. This is the link from the King James. So this is what in the King James is called Ecclesiasticus. So, but this is Sirach, and so Sirach 1:1. So you can show everybody the prologue.
And then I'm going to share something else. Here we go. And I figured now it's probably cool to get into into Josephus if we could.
Well, real quick, let me actually just show the prologue very quickly of Sirach. So Brother Jay, if you could present that. The audience can see. When it talks about for the same things uttered in Hebrew and translated into another tongue. All right, so if you could actually just scroll down. Yeah. Oh, real quick, before you do that, scroll up again, scroll up to the top where it says the prologue of the wisdom of Jesus, the son of Sirach. All right. So, and this prologue was actually written by Abu.
By Yeshua ben Sirach, who was the grandson of the person who wrote the Hebrew version of Sirach.
That's right. That is right. All right. And so if you could, my brother Jay, man, can you go down where it says the Hebrew? I'll tell you where it's right. Actually, it's right in front of you. I apologize. It says for the same thing uttered in Hebrew. If you could actually zoom in. So we can show that the same word that we just finished seeing in the text in the Codex Sinaiticus, Hebraisti, in the Greek, is the very term Hebrew rendered into English. You see right there, you have it right in front of you. It's like literally right in front of you. All you got to do is just zoom in. If you zoom in, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about.
All right, what is it supposed to say?
Yes, it's right there. There you go. It says, for the same things uttered in Hebrew and translated into another tongue have not the same force in them. And this is, by the way, one of the ones that some of the camps like to use whenever they want to make appeals to, so whenever they want to make their arguments against translations or whatever the case may be. So here we see that word Hebrew in the English, and in the text underneath, in this specific version, which was rendered in Greek, it was Hebraisti, right? So there's no argument to be made, and that word doesn't really mean Hebrew or whatever the case may be. But let's go ahead and take a look now at Josephus. So,
Philo. Actually, I want to do Philo real quick.
You want to do Philo? Okay, that's
just to build it up. We'll build up to Josephus in a second because I want to show Philo, and then I want to show one other thing, just some questions that I want to ask.
Sure.
And then we'll jump right into Josephus. So let me know if you can see what I'm sharing now.
You're good to go, man.
There it is. Okay, excellent. So on the screen, this is just a page from Philo. It's from his Peri Abraham. the 12th section, 12th whatever, yeah, and also known as On Abraham. And you can see highlighted, the first two words highlighted are Ebraion glote, the Hebrew tongue. And he refers to this, using the Hebrew tongue to refer to the nation as Israel. There's 2 points to be made here. Number one, clearly he's using the word Hebrew to refer to the language. Number two, on a minor side note that we touched on earlier, he clearly understood the word as being pronounced Israel, not Yasher Al or Yasher El, however the Torah Knights are pronouncing it now, or Yasher Allah like they were pronouncing it previously, you know? And now, if I may, I want to link to another point. Sorry about this. I'm just going to cut through some text. Here we go. Here's the thing I want to get into before we go into Josephus. And let me know if you can see the questions on the screen here. Here's some questions to ask. Now, it is true that the word Ivrit doesn't, the Hebrew word Ivrit doesn't appear in the Tanakh as a reference to the language. But here's some questions to keep in mind. Number one, what was the name of the language of the Hebrews before Jacob's son Judah was born? Because even Lamad admits that when the word Yehudit, which appears in the book of Kings, second book of Kings, 18th chapter, even he admits that it's a patronymic. The language in that case is named after Judah, but the language predates Judah. So a fun thought experiment is, what was it named before, Judah was born? Number two, if the language could be named after Judah, could it also have been named after Eber, right? So it begs the question, couldn't it have been called Ivrit in other cases? Now, there's another verse in Isaiah 19, it's called the language of Canaan. So clearly there's synonyms existing for this language. This one language can be referred to in multiple ways. And you see that in other languages. Faithful and I were talking about this offline. You might take like a word like Spanish, and in one case, people are referring to it as Espanol. And then recently I attended a lecture where the guy kept referring to it as La Lengua de Cervantes, right? The tongue or the language of Cervantes, whatever the case. So there's synonyms that can refer to the same language. So if you can refer to it as Yehudit or Yahweh Dayath, as they call it, and you can refer to it as the language of Canaan, could you also refer to it as Ivrit? Question number three. Is Hebrew vocabulary only limited to those words which appear in the Tanakh? I think this is a very interesting question. When people who knew Hebrew were reading the Tanakh, were the only words in their vocabulary the words that appeared in the Tanakh, or did they have other words? Like, how would they be able to read the text? Obviously, usually you have a language more expansive than what's written. Now, I just want to keep those in mind, and I'm going to go really quickly here to Josephus now. So this is the text of Josephus. And he uses the phrase Ebraisti twice, but the significant part is what story he's covering. He's covering the same story in 2 Kings 18, verses 26 and 28, where Eliakim is talking to Rabshakeh, right? Now, in that story, in 2 Kings, in the text of the Tanakh, it's referred to as Yehudit. The language is referred to as Yehudit. Literally, we could call it Judean if you want to refer to it as in English. The Jewish language, right? The Jewish tongue. And the Torah Knights call it Yahweh Dayath, right? And their argument is that you can't call it Hebrew, you have to call it Yahweh Dayath, right? Because that's what appears in this particular passage. But here's an interesting thing. Their argument was that you can't call it Hebrew, but yet we see an ancient Jew familiar with the text using the word Hebrew as synonymous for Yahweh Dayath. Now, they would say he's going off, but on what grounds? Yahweh Dayath, Yehudit, the Jewish tongue, the Judean language, however you want to call it, it was synonymous with Hebrew, and we see an ancient Jew treating it as such. When he recounts the language, he uses the word Ebraisti or Hebrew to refer to the language that they made reference to. So while they pretend with their modern guesswork and constantly creating new rules that you can't refer to it as Hebrew, you have to refer to it as Judean or whatever, the reality is that ancient Jews didn't understand it this way. They understood it as synonymous. I don't know if I'm still here.
I apologize. There we go. Yep. And by the way, the interesting thing is that here we have an example of Israelites themselves using the term. So where are they coming with this idea that somehow you can't use the term? I mean, if the Israelites themselves are using it, why in the world would they make a faulty argument against it? Well, the reality is because they have no real answers for any of the things that we've been presenting in some of the other things that we've mentioned. So they're looking for pretty much they're pretty much grasping at straws, trying to find something that they could possibly use. But it's really, in my personal opinion, a perfect example of the desperation that they have. Because instead of being men and admitting that they're wrong, that, man, we might be just getting all of this wrong. No, they're going to try to fight this thing to the very end, even if it means that they're made to look unlearned in the process, because that's what they look like right now. They look absolutely positively unlearned, arguing that way that they are, and I don't say that to be disrespectful, but it is what it is, but hold on one second.
This is what I would say. We responded to their argument. We showed that this new argument, first of all, is a completely new rule that they set up, because just recently, as late 2017, they were still calling it Hebrew and Abare and Abari and all that good stuff, right? But so it's a completely new rule that they made up. Number two, most importantly, they ignored the salient point of our dispute, the real issues. They ignored all that. But we responded to their argument, and we showed that the rule that they made up is completely arbitrary, and ancient Jews didn't agree with them. Yes, there's texts that do not refer to the Hebrew language as Hebrew, but nonetheless, those are using synonyms as recognized by ancient Jews. Yehudit is a reference to Ivrit. This so-called Judean tongue or Jewish tongue is a reference to Hebrew. And you see that even in Josephus, So we responded to their arguments. Hopefully now they can actually get to our real arguments, some of which appeared in this video as well.
Right. And even though this is an arbitrary point, well, I wouldn't consider it arbitrary, in the grand scheme of things, but the line of questioning, that Lamad posed at the very beginning, what God does faithful to God worship? I worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the reality is that, unfortunately, Torah Knights do not worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is what it is, and hopefully one day, all of you, if it be the Lord's will, if He show His mercy on you, all of you would come to know Him. But based on the way that these guys argue and the stances that they take, and the intellectual dishonesty that I see from them, I really do believe that it's going to take a divine intervention for these men to come out of whatever it is that they're in, because some of these guys just seem utterly deceived. I don't know if you feel that way, Abu, but I absolutely feel that way.
Yeah, no, it's certainly not my desire to be intellectually it's not my desire to disrespect anyone, but unfortunately, I do feel that a level of intellectual dishonesty, that it is fair to say that that's what's been present. The way they ignored the core arguments and tried to create a new false controversy is a prime example of that.
Right. Yeah. So, I think that's pretty much it, right? Did we have anything else that we wanted to bring out, or?
No, I'd say that's it. That's it. We pretty much covered everything. We covered everything for Officer Chapash, and we covered everything for the Torah Knights as well. I think this is a good one. And just for people who are wondering, we do have a series this is sort of an informal discussion on the subject. We're going to have a more formal series on a number of topics relevant to Lashawan Qadash coming forth. Hopefully we get it out in the next month or so. And I think it's going to be good stuff.
Absolutely. And I do want to say this, before we end things off, I'm going to let Jay definitely let everybody out there know that he's got an album coming out and everything like that, because I definitely want him to promote and do his thing too, because he's absolutely been a wonderful help in this hangout. And I salute you, Jay. Thank you for assisting us and everything that you've been doing.
100%, man. You're invaluable.
Yeah. But before we get to that, I did want to say this though. I don't want anybody out there to think that I look at these men and I wish ill will upon them, because I don't. I do not at all wish any ill will upon any of the men that we discussed today. While I may have extremely sharp disagreements with them, my heart's desire is that every last one of them would come to know Christ truly as Lord and Savior. And in the case of Torah Knights, clearly they have rejected the Messiah. I would hope that they would come out of that folly, and that one day they would come to know him as Lord and Savior, that they would experience the same joy that we have in Messiah. And for my brothers and sisters out there who are listening to this, if you encounter these men, whether it be the ISUPK, GMS, or any of these people, remember that these are lost souls, that they're individuals. These are somebody's brother, somebody's son, somebody, maybe even somebody's father in some cases. And just remember that you too were a lost person. So keep these people in prayer. Pray for the Lord's mercy upon them. And if you do encounter them, remember to keep 1 Peter 3:15 in mind. At times it can seem like we can sometimes take a bit of a sharp approach in what we do, but ultimately our heart's desire is to see every last one of these individuals come to know Christ as Lord and Savior, and be saved for not only the remission of sins, but also for their eternal standing in the world to come. And with that being said, though, I definitely want to thank you, Abu, for everything that you've done. You are walking, talking encyclopedia when it comes to these topics, man. Even way more than I could possibly know on this topic. But I appreciate you, and I look forward to our series. Hopefully, Lord willing, we will do this sometime in the coming months, as time permits. Is there any way that anybody out there can reach you if they like? Get in contact?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, is there any way that people can get in contact with you? How can they get in contact?
If it's me, I can be found on Twitter, Abu Khamar, ABUKHAMR. You send me a message there. You can also find me on Facebook. Contact if you're having trouble with any of those avenues. Also, my YouTube pages. I have one Abu Khamar and the other one Abu Khamar al Masihi. But if anyone's having trouble contacting me, just shoot a line to Faithful or to Vocab, and they also have ways of reaching me as well. But yeah, that's basically the gist of it. I'd love to talk with anyone on these subjects, and also the comment section to this video will be open. So hopefully, people who have objections, we can correspond in there.
And have a cordial discourse, and see if these individuals are still claiming that they're right. Well, let's put the evidence to the test. Let's see who actually is presenting factual information when it comes to this topic. Now, Brother Jay, again, I know you said it at the beginning. You have the album After Deception. Real quick, if we could kind of end things off, man. Could you guys kind of give people just a small snippet of the first single off of the album? The one that I like, man.
Yeah,
definitely let people out there know, man. And when can we potentially look forward to it? I know, this is all subject to change, but when can we look forward to that first single dropping, more or less?
Right now, I got it planned to drop on the 14th of next month. And that's for the first single, and then the second one to come a couple of weeks after that. But got some things, some phone calls to make, and some that came in, man. So it's gonna be real good, man. Things lining up for this project. So when it drops, it's gonna drop. And so yeah, man, this first single was called All We Need Is Love. And that's probably the reason why I'm dropping on the 14th. So while most people are thinking of, it's Valentine's Day, this song is obviously based upon the love in which God tells us to have for one another. And so I just figured I'd just drop it on that actual day. But so the 14th of February, Lord's will, the first single will drop from this project. So I'll give you guys a little snippet of this song. All right, let me pull it up. All right, here we go. Whoa, feel the beat. All that we need up is some love. Yeah. All that we need up. Love your neighbor as yourself. Take your head to the front side. We on the right side. As I look around the world, this is what I see. All the people. Yeah. As I look around the world, this is what I see. All the people, it is like this, yeah. So how can we
that's all they gotta get. That's all they're gonna get for now. Yeah, that song is hot, man. I can't wait till that thing drop. You know, yeah, man.
Yeah, bro. The date for the album drop, I'm going. Lord's will announce it. The end of the first. I think. Hold on, my calendar again. I believe it's the end of the first week of February. I'll have all the dates and stuff pretty much set in stone. Actually, the end of the second week, because the first February is on the Thursday. So that following week, the week of the 5th, Lord's will, I'll be making an announcement regarding when the actual album is going to be dropping.
That's what's up, man. And of course, this channel will be promoting the music when it comes out, letting people know where they can find it. And of course, all y'all brothers and sisters out there, definitely show this man some support, because this man has incredible talent. The Lord has blessed this man immensely in that area and also in the ministry that he is doing. And, again, I want to thank Abu for coming on through. I want to thank for everybody that watched this thing and the people who are going to watch in the future. Hopefully the people that we presented this video to will respond and, actually address the objections. And hopefully a lot of these things that we said will, Lord willing, cut them to the heart and cause them to re-examine the doctrines that they have been beguiled by, and this is just one of many. But with that being said, I want to thank everybody out there. I hope this has edified somebody out there. God bless you all and take care.